Good evening, Thomas. Good evening, friends.
Good evening, Charles. How's it going?
I was going to say that there was this, I was going to do a whole discussion about Chris Christie and his fatal error. Then I realized that there's like no Chris Christie. Like Chris Christie's kind of fake. He doesn't really quite exist. He's there, but he's not there. He takes up a weight, but he doesn't have any heft to him. He's full
He's
body.
never been he's never been so small in his life.
I know. I know. It's depressing to think about.
Oh,
Just
he blew it. He had the one good line at the very beginning, and it's just been over
he
since
had,
then.
you know what it is? Do you know what it is? I think there's something about how when you run against something rather than for something, people just don't want it. They don't. It doesn't taste right in their mouth because we're kind of a nation of con men slash visionaries, right? Depending on your point of view, and we don't like to hear people talk shit about other people unless it's like in some like larger context. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, and I think it's also too. It goes to what we see generally over the last couple of decades with when like you have all Republicans in power. When they have all three branches, for instance, they do absolutely nothing because they can't govern. They love to be the Harlem Globetrotter, or excuse me, the Washington Generals, and run against um, everything that that we're going to fight against. It's always we're going to fight back against something. I mean, it's to your point. That's exactly what it is all the time.
well, I had a very interesting day today because I was talking with some friends of mine who were connected to Speaker Johnson, which was kind of interesting. We can go into that in a second, but there's sort of a lot of things I want to say about our new speaker, the problem of Chris Christie generally, the problem of U.S. support for Israel, what Joe Biden is getting wrong on all of this. I don't know. I mean, what do you think then? Like, are there? How would I put this? Where should we go, Thomas? What's the path? I mean, should I talk about the piece I wrote about Turkey? What do you think? The one about blackmail? What do you think? Where are we going to?
Oh
Where do
man,
we
there's
go?
so much to choose from. I
I've
think,
been very productive lately. Honestly,
yeah.
I've been like eating tacos and like messaging women, to potentially be the second Mrs. Johnson, and doing some genetics work. And basically, that's been my life these days. You see.
Well, your
But
bonus check is going to be really good this week, Charles. I'm impressed with your production, the amount of journalism you cranked
thank,
out today. So you'll be well rewarded. Okay.
thank you, sir. I appreciate that. As
Yes.
everybody knows, Tom is my sugar daddy, as these things go. So, and of course, Loading and I had some wonderful tacos today at Bar Taco, where I, of course, spent the entire time looking at the waitresses and the hostess, but not asking either of them out because that's how I do these things. This is how I do it in America. I think very positive thoughts about women and don't actually proposition them because I am. Totally down to fight Likud and actually get assassinated, but I am a coward about asking out 22-year-old waitresses because that's just how it is. That's America right there. Anyway, I also saw Killers of the Flower Moon with a friend of mine the other evening. My best. Everyone needs to have a best gay friend if you're a heterosexual man, because you need to just sort of have that around, just so you know that you're not a homosexual and you don't want to be one. Because whenever you hear about their lives, it's kind of sad and glum. So you always have to have that person around in your life. So we did that, and then yeah, I mean, let's get into Speaker Johnson first and foremost. I wrote a post today at my Substack about kind of like his history, what he's about, what he thinks about, and I sort of went through the kind of record in Shreveport. And by way of kind of background, I have my great aunt settled in Shreveport, Louisiana, and she proceeded to just breed with her husband. And I think they ultimately had like 12 children, all told, something crazy like that. And so I have like a whole wing of my family that is Shreveporters. I think that's how you call them. And I've been down there a few times, had some crawfish, shot some guns, did various other redneck pursuits. I actually own a generator from the first Gulf War. Like one of those ones that takes like all that diesel, which I won in a I won in like an auction kind of situation, kind of set up down there. And so it's a generator down there. My cousins actually like they run it, and they kind of like my second cousins run it, and they send me a bill every now and again, or a check every now and again when it actually makes money because there's some hurricane or whatever down there. So it's a place that I know decently, as much as a Yankee can know Louisiana, and it's a place that I like, and it's a place. So I'm familiar with basically Speaker Johnson's district. And I should say, by way of background, I maybe had like a grand total of like maybe as many as six conversations with Johnson since I first met him in what would have been, I guess, 2017, maybe, yeah, late 2017, early 2018. And he is, how best to describe him? He is a small C Christian gentleman. He is not a bomb thrower type. He is not. He is cool, calm, and collected. Which, as I write in the piece today, which I think maybe Tom, you can find that and post it up there in the jumbotron so people have it. Um, what can I say about him? He's basically the kind of person who has spent their entire life dedicated to a cause, and in his case, the cause is what we might kind of consider. I think Christian nationalism goes too far. It's kind of like a Christian incrementalism, that basically what he's interested in is using the law as a lawyer to kind of regulate a lot of the seedier aspects of the kind of organized crime world, which is kind of all over Louisiana. And I think, the way to think about him, yeah, I think Tom, you've got it. You put it up in the jumbotron so we have it for people. Um, our first kind of conversation in a serious way took place on about the tech issues and the tech companies. And my view was that the tech companies were increasingly predatory, that they were monopolistic, that they had been effectively shielded from any regulation by trial lawyers and the like because of Section 230. And all the basic bitch arguments that now people make that I was making before everybody else, but of course they all took credit for later on, because that's how it is when you're a nerd. Everybody does steals your homework, just how it is. You accept these things and you move on. But yes, we had a long kind of conversation about that, and he was quite close to Gates, to Matt Gates, who's obviously over in Florida. And I'm not. Let's just say no one would ever confuse me with being a preacher. But I am, I'm sort of friendly to the evangelicals and to the sort of religious types out there. I'm not a hater, right? I don't have a bigoted bone in my body when it comes to the religious types. It's not my bag. I'm not really into that kind of thing. I find going to mega churches to be a hilarious sociological thing, a bit like Mark Twain seeing the Holy Rollers over there, traveling around the country. And so but I'm not a hater. Like that. And sometimes you find that a lot of these very Christian types, they're actually kind of useful in all kinds of interesting ways, because they at least have a book that they pretend to pay lip service to. Some of them actually take their faith quite seriously. Some of them are quite helpful in all kinds of interesting ways. And it was sort of my experience with Mike Johnson that he was like one of the least crazy of the religious right, at least certainly of the 2016 vintage. So we should mention, so he's going to need to raise about $250 million going into the 2024 cycle. He is not going to be able to do that. He's not going to accomplish it. Pretty much everybody kind of knows that. And he has, just by way of background, he's never raised more than $1 million for his, I think in total, but certainly for each of his political campaigns. So he represents one of the poorest districts in the country. Certainly one of the poorest white ones, to the extent that these things matter, people pay attention to them. And he is a very lovely man. He's very kind. He is, you know, he is, how would best to describe him? He is the kind of person that you hire as your attorney, or that you would like as your neighbor. He is the kind of person who is earnest without being brilliant. and he doesn't really have any serious ideas beyond kind of his just kind of general Christian, Christendom. Now, I think he comes by it honestly. Okay, so let me just kind of give you a little bit of this. He's pro-life. I'm more of a moderate on the abortion thing. I think people have a I think you can't really have women's rights without being pro choice. I think that this is a matter of people where people of sincere conviction can disagree. Unfortunately, now that Roe v. Wade has been overturned, people can kind of litigate these things in the courts in their respective states. And I never believed that Wyoming and California should have the same policies on abortion. I've never had that view. And I've always kind of had the Joe Biden-esque view that Roe v. Wade was sort of wrongly decided. And so, from my perspective, I'm actually quite pleased at how the courts have kind of dealt with this issue. And I know there might be people who disagree with this, people who are, pro-choice, people who are pro-life, whatever. My view is basically that I have a sort of moderate position. First trimester, okay. Second, third trimester, more complicated. Personally, if I knocked up a woman and had another child, an oops baby out there in the world, I'd be perfectly happy with it. Having bastard children is totally fine by me, and I would love him just as much as my own legitimate daughter. So that's basically the way I come down on the issue. But basically, the way to understand Mike Johnson is, he was the product of an unplanned pregnancy, right? So his mother was 17 when she had him. He was out there in the world. His parents had, by all accounts, a very acrimonious marriage, from what we understand about it, and ultimately divorced. And he was sort of shuttled between his father and his mother in the sort of Louisiana area. Now, he later gets what's called a covenant marriage, which is a kind of like restrictionist kind of view of it's basically an anti no fault divorce marriage. I think they're only available in like 3 states when I was researching this. And basically what they are is that you can't get divorced like right away. You have to go through like special counseling or whatever. They're quite rare even in the states where they're allowed. But as somebody who's divorced myself, I have to say I'm not necessarily persuaded that covenant marriages are a bad thing, right? Certainly I think it kind of depends on how you think about these things. But in even one way to think about his kind of Christianity is as a kind of reaction against the kind of instability that he was experiencing when he was a young man. His father was when he was 12 years old. When Mike Johnson was 12 years old, his father, who was a fireman, was in a very massive industrial fire accident and had burns over 80% of his body, and it was thought that he had about a 10% chance of survival, and ultimately he lived. Right, so here you have Mike Johnson, unplanned pregnancy. That's why he exists in the world. He's got a father that's burns all over his body, 10% chance of survival. He makes it. And then later there's an incident with his wife where his wife gets into a car accident with him. And she was basically, there was a grave chance that she could have been paralyzed from this car accident, but ultimately isn't paralyzed. Now, there's there's the secular account of this, right, which I think is not an unfair account, which is that he's just very lucky, right? He beat the odds, right? But obviously, he's a man of faith, and his view is that prayer, and the support of his community was ultimately what carried his family through in both instances. And he talks about this often. He talks about how he ran for office, and I have this up in my piece that Tom's pinned up there, about up from my Substack. For those who are curious, by the way, it's a free Substack. You're more than welcome. If people like these kind of things though, and they want to contribute, whatever money I make from the Substack, I just put into more research, buying things, getting documents, all that kind of thing. I have it. My day job is running traitwell.com, where I'm into genetics. And if people are interested in genetics stuff, we can kind of have that discussion as well at some point. And I also do tech investing, sort of on the side. So I see there kind of like new faces or whatever in there. Um, for what it's worth, I was a Tom Emmer fan and remain a Tom Emmer fan. I think Tom Emmer would have been a better Speaker of the House than Mike Johnson, who I like, but he's not lighting the world on fire. Let's just put it that way. And I do think that there is a danger that a lot of the religion, a lot of the people have about how he's a seditionist, how he's, this, that, and the other thing. I think all of that goes too far. The best way to kind of think about Mike Johnson is that there were kind of people of good faith who had arguments about the 2020 election. These arguments they thought could be litigated in the Supreme Court. When the Supreme Court ultimately rejected these arguments, they made that that there's sort of many different camps of seditionists, if you want to put it that way. They're the people who wanted Trump to have his day in court when he lost. That was that. There are people who believed that basically, we should have a violent overthrow of the Constitution, of the whole system. That's one group. So there's sort of Mike Johnson is kind of in the let's pursue this in the rule of law kind of camp, and he is very much a fan of the rule of law and of the court system generally. Now, as he's growing up, he's making all these arguments. He goes to LSU for undergrad and later for law school. He marries his wife, Kelly. They have three children that are biologically theirs, and they sort of take in a black kind of local youth that he meets when he's about 25 or so, and he basically raises as his own. Now, there's obviously a lot of questions about this youth that he took in, who's now like a grown man. So obviously a lot of questions about this. I think there's some problems with kind of the characterizations of kind of there's the negative interpretation, which is that he's human trafficking, right? Then there's the kind of more realistic explanation, I think, which is that in the South, particularly among people who are of sincere belief, there's a lot more adoption. These adoption things take place in kind of informal ways, and particularly in cultures that are more kind of pro-life, there's a lot more adoption than maybe there would be in other kind of cultures in the country. And certainly, I've experienced this with my own family. My kind of more redneck wing of the family has taken in what they call strays over the years. So these are people whose parents fell on hard times or people who were ill. And indeed, in my own case, when my mother was sick with cancer, I sort of lived with various relatives all around the United States and indeed in Guatemala, where my uncle lived. And so I'm somewhat familiar with the kind of thing of basically being quasi adopted, quasi informally adopted in my own life, which is kind of more painful topic, which I don't necessarily talk about often, but spent a good 2 or 3 years of my childhood, bouncing around. Let's put it that way, between various relatives. So anyway, what can I say about him? Well, he is very much an opponent of the casino interest within the Republican Party. And while he is pro-Israel, he's sort of pro-Israel in the way that like a lot of the Christians in action types are. He's not like one of these guys who's like always sucking the dick of Bibi, right? He's not a Lindsey Graham. Okay. He's not a Kevin McCarthy who will do whatever the casino lobby wants. And in fact, throughout his kind of tenure in Louisiana politics and in sort of Louisiana activism, he's always calling for like regulating the seedy sex shops in the area. He's always talking about regulating the casinos that are kind of growing up and going all over Louisiana. This is not a laissez les bon temps rouler type. He is not the Mardi Gras Louisianan. He is your mega church attending North Louisianan type, and he's not really into the Cajun mafia. He's sort of the sort of like basically middle class aspirant to upper middle class aspirant, meritocratic, redneck world. That's kind of what he hails from. Um, he, of course, is litigating a lot of these issues through the courts on behalf of the Alliance Defense Fund, which, ultimately it's renamed. I forget what it ultimately is renamed, but I myself had dealings with them when I was a student in college, where David French represented me when I was falsely accused of sexual harassment by a crazy ex-girlfriend. And I've written about that before on my Twitter stream, if people are curious about it. She's apparently writing a book about me, which oh wow, great for me having a woman write a book about me from when I dated her from ages 17 to 19, when I was 17 to 19. So now I'm 35, but whatever. So David French is kind of like he would be basically like the pro Bush war type. He's the sort of like, Christian, but not crazy evangelical type. He's sort of, they're reasonable Christians, I think would be the way to put it. Neighborly Christians. And I was speaking earlier today with Senator Cassidy, who knows, Mike Johnson fairly well. And I was also texting with Governor Landrieu, uh, or Landry rather, both of whom I know, and both of whom I think I've contributed to both of them. I'm not totally sure if somebody wants to fact check me on that. I think I gave money to Landry when he was Attorney General of Louisiana, and then and then Cassidy, I know because we had a lot of conversations about genetics, and he's kind of into that kind of thing. I think he's a doctor by trade, but Cassidy was, I think, one of the few Republicans to vote to impeach Donald Trump. And so I've had these kind of like, if you want to like understand the Republican Party in the modern incarnation, you really have to spend time in Louisiana. You really have to get to know the people who are down there because it's a very interesting, dynamic state. It's very insular in a lot of ways, but it's very important for understanding the party generally. So anyway, what can I say about this? I think that the best way to understand Mike Johnson is as kind of following and going through the kind of Christian circles, the kind of institutional right wing circles. But he's never calling for like banning porn outright, right? He's always asking for regulations. He's always asking for buffer zones for strip clubs. He's always kind of pursuing that approach. And I think that that is an important thing to understand. He's not a real bomb thrower type. He just wants to kind of keep this stuff away from the children. And in fact, in when he's running for office, in his, when he's running for office for Congress for the fourth district of Louisiana, his opponent, who's a Democrat, actually says like he's a very decent man, and they actually like his opponent actually criticizes the Democratic Party of Louisiana for saying that Johnson is a nut, basically, and that Johnson is a bigot. He has sincere religious beliefs. Those beliefs are not really in step with the United States of America, like if we're just honest about it, but they're very much kind of like well tailored to his district. And anyway, before that, he was also engaged with, with sort of like what we might call community activism. He was maybe a community activist, not unlike Barack Obama, but this time of a sort of more Louisiana bent, where he's pushing for ordinances, trying to push for things that are to defend women and children, to make sure that, to crack down on prostitution. And, he has a sort of worldview. This is kind of the worldview that he's a part of. And in fact, I think I put this in the piece, but I don't remember if I did or not. But when he and I spoke, he was talking a lot about how Facebook and Instagram kind of exploit children. And this was something that he was talking about in 2017 or so when we first met. So kind of ahead of the curve, right? Ahead of the Facebook files, ahead of Francis Hagen and all of that. That was sort of the backdrop there. Now, uh, what can I say here, Thomas? Is there anything you want to add on that? I know you read both pieces, or you read all the pieces that I put out there.
No, you. I would just say the only thing I'd add is I listened. I forced myself to listen to his interview with Hannity because it was long form, and I just wanted to at least hear how he answered Hannity's questions. And Hannity asked him about like some of the rhetoric he used in the past, and he did say, I'm a lawyer, and my job was to represent my client and do it like as vigorously and as as well as I could, and uh, that's the reason for
Yeah,
that. So
he has a discussion one time too where he says, when he's being asked as he's running for office, um, like how do you feel that you've lost some of these cases or whatever? And he's like, well, I'm okay with losing cases because I think these ideas should be brought forward in many cases. And if you lose, you dust yourself off, and then you go about, he's like he's like you just he's grateful to live in a country of the rule of law, and that he can make these arguments, and then he'll kind of go on to another thing, right? So he sort of sees it like a win loss percentage. He doesn't really get obsessed about he's not a zealot, in other words, right? He's neither a zealot nor a bigot. But he has his sort of sincere views. I should also note too, Sean Hannity is a super evangelical pro, Netanyahu type. Hannity and I used to know each other quite well at one point, though he and I sort of separated because of Trump's close ties to the Israelis, which we can kind of get into if people are curious about the Israel stuff. But the way I would kind of understand him is he's pro-Israel, but he's not really an asset of theirs, like some of the other people that are effectively in their pocket. And we can kind of see that with kind of the more mobbed up Israelis or Netanyahu assets like your David Saxes. And Thomas here found a very wonderful photo of David Sachs with
I did.
yes,
Yeah.
tell the class about that. I mean, that's some good stuff. I like that quite a bit.
Yeah, so I found this photo of David Sachs on some really old, like defunct, but it's still up, like some like first in, version of a social media. And it was like called foobar.com.
Of course
You
it
can't
was.
make it up. And uh, so it's like it's him and his wife who he's married to now, although at the time they weren't married. And they're both dressed up as pirates at this Halloween party, and I was like, "Oh, that's perfect because he is a fucking pirate. That's exactly what he is, like in
Yeah, and
real
of
life."
course he was immediately trashing Mike Johnson, right?
Yeah,
As were a number of the kind of Likudnik types. And I think that that is important to note, right? They were all afraid of Emmer. Emmer has a lot of ties to Navy intelligence. They were spooked by him. They got Trump to knife Emmer in the back. Emmer was so disgusted by that he just left Congress. He just like got up and went where he just like left. And ultimately Mike Johnson got in there. Now,
but I think the question is, at least if I could, so you see the stuff, the quotes, obviously in the past where he's like in Jerusalem, going around the little tunnels and getting the full tour from the from the lobby with Jim Jordan, like in 2020, and he says something to the effect that this was God's will that I'm in this position, and so we have a Speaker of the House with all that said that we're uh, we're on the precipice, or maybe currently already in World War III, but uh, it's going to be. I'm not sure how his background, what the case for being able to manage it effectively. I don't know if anybody can that's in that position,
yeah, I should say
especially
too.
with the Republican Party. But
I think there's I think there's a long history though of these types that are institutionalist types, right? Like they present as bomb throwers, they get into positions of power, they then, basically become more moderate just because the position dictates their behavior. And it
I
seems
would,
that that's
yeah,
the case with Johnson. I should also note too that Johnson, while he's been critical of Ukraine war money in the past, he's been critical mostly on the grounds that like a lot of the money just seems to be wasted, not over the argument that it should be that they should be funded in the first place, right?
yeah.
So
There's truth
I
to
think
that. And
that's an important.
you said that one of the things you experienced, like when you were over there, and then in Turkey, is finding out a lot of the stuff that we've paid for. Like we've gotten totally ripped off because the stuff doesn't work, and we pay. I can't imagine what the markups are that we pay for these things, but I mean, obviously the taxpayer, we've been getting a horrible deal. Uh, am I correct in saying that? And maybe
Yeah,
he
I mean,
possibly
yes,
has
right.
some
And I
insight
and I
into
do
that.
think somebody's pointed out there's this video of Johnson at the Republican Jewish Coalition that somebody was sharing, and we'll put that up in the jumbotron because I think it's important. And he's pro-Israel. He's at this pro-Israel event, the Republican Jewish Coalition event. The Republican Jewish Coalition has gotten in trouble in different years for basically being a front for the casino interests, many of which are Chinese and sort of Israeli. But look, everybody is pro-Israel, right? These days on the Republican and much of the Democratic side. But the question then becomes like, what do we mean by that? What are we talking about, right? So there's a lot of different kind of approaches here, and I think what we might see from Biden, Johnson's going to try to do this standalone bill that's pro-Israel, but I think what we're going to see from Biden is he's just going to, he's just going to bunch them all together. And I don't. I think that that's going to be very interesting to watch the dynamic that takes place between Johnson and Schumer and Biden. Right. That's obviously going to play out over the next bit. I should note it's kind of interesting. So, like today was the centenary of Turkey, Turkish Republic, which is, it's been a very long-standing ally of the United States. As I post in my piece today about that, my experiences in Turkey and my experiences with the Turks. uh, they quite rightly point out that they never did a USS Liberty to us, nor is there like a Turkish lobby that like targets Americans who are working on technology, nor is there. I mean, we could go down the list of all the things that Turkey doesn't do to us. And
There is
during
no there is no dancing Turks on 9/11.
There are no dancing Turks on 9/11. There were no Turkish spies involved in crowd management on January 6th. And of course, there are no Turks. The Turks actually fought alongside us. And there's a photo that I have of Marilyn Monroe with the Turks in the Korean War in 1956 or so. So there's a long history of basically the Turks allied with the United States, second largest army in NATO, and it's pretty interesting that not a single candidate running for office on the Republican side, uh, or even Biden, I don't even think Biden made a comment that was pro Turkey, even though they're a country that's like geopolitically very, very important. I find that very interesting and quite revealing of something. I'm just not quite sure what it is. But in any event, what can I say about this? It seems.
Lindsey Graham did compare them to being the quote unquote squad of NATO now.
Yes, they're the squad of NATO, right?
He always has some extremely insightful, principled things to say.
Yes. Well, of course, I've talked before about Larry Flynn, or not Larry Flint, Larry Flint, the guy who was the hustler pornographer guy who I knew socially, who told me that the Israelis knew that Graham was, seeing a married defense contractor. Um, so there's a long history of Lindsey Graham, and I think Graham is quite lucky he wasn't charged. I think he was an unindicted co-conspirator, right, in the whole setup with Georgia and all of that. And maybe there'll be other pressure that's brought to bear. I know the governor of South Carolina is not a huge fan of Lindsey Graham for other reasons, and may use the January 6th thing as a pretense for getting rid of him. Um, I do think too. The other thing to kind of note, one final kind of point about Mike Johnson, and then we'll have Richard speak. And if anyone else wants to chime in on any of these topics or anything else that I've written at my Substack, or it's just sort of general queries, happy to have you up, and happy to engage with you. Particularly if I don't know you or you haven't spoken to one of my spaces before, please DM me or Thomas here, and we will, we'll maybe have you up. Uh,
Last thing I was
yeah.
thinking too, Charles, real quick, is does Jason Smith get to retain the chair of Ways and Means?
Yeah, it's an interesting question of how much does Mike Johnson make the House his own, right? How much is he a continuation of Kevin McCarthy? And how much does he have his own ideas? And of course, there's this other problem too, which is how much does any of this really matter, right? Like George Santos is about to go to jail, so that means the Republicans will go from a +4 majority to a +3 majority. And then, of course, there's this question of like, what happens then, right? Like, if only 3 members of Congress can basically veto anything that happens in the House, that gets pretty exciting pretty quickly. And it does seem to me that one thing that would be kind of interesting to think through is, what does Johnson get accomplished? Because there are 18 seats that are held by Republicans that voted for Biden in 2020. And so it seems pretty clear that we're going to have a Speaker Hakeem Jeffries, and in basically whatever 12 to 13 months. So what are the things that Johnson himself gets done, if anything at all? And I know Matt Gaetz, who's an ally of Johnson's and knows Johnson fairly well. I know that he has a series of reforms that he wants to get accomplished. Bans on lobbying and sort of changes he wants with an up or down vote on in the House. And that'll be kind of interesting to see what happens there. But Johnson is not really liked by the lobbyist world, which kind of sees him as kind of like a marginal member at best. And I think, but I do think the secret to understanding Johnson is to go and read a lot of go to newspapers.com and read a lot of the stuff about Shreveport. Should also mention too, he's very close to the Family Research Council, or I think that's how you say it, the Family Research Council, which is something of a kind of sham event, kind of quasi-evangelical, quasi-social con group. I met with them many years ago myself when we were talking about going after the Southern Poverty Law Center back when it was under kind of more Israeli management. If you'll recall, the Family Research Council had effectively a homosexual shooter that came there and shot a bunch of people. And I think he effectively just shot the security guard, actually, because the security guard kind of wrestled with the guy. But I think he's currently in prison, and there's this whole kind of question about what was really going on there and all of that. But in any event, Richard, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I don't disagree strongly with anything you've said. I mean, I agree with the general characterization of Mike Johnson. He reminds me a lot of people I've met, many of whom are from Louisiana, who are a lot like that. Many of whom are lawyers, many of whom are the nice guy lawyer. So I don't. It's hard for me to really hate him. Um, I
No,
did
and I will tell
notice.
you, just interpersonally, of all the
Yeah.
members of Congress that I've met, I've maybe met like 50 to 60 of them over the course of the last five to 10 years or so. He's unquestionably one of the kindest people I've ever met in
Right.
politics, and he gives you kind of Ned Flanders vibes when you
Oh yeah.
actually deal with
Yeah.
him. Um,
Yeah.
and I think he's a sincere. I mean, to the extent that one can peer into somebody's soul, I think he's
Yeah.
a sincere person. I don't get a whiff of
Right.
hypocrisy or any of that sort of thing with him.
Yeah.
Though one
It's
never knows these days.
well, kids, it's 7:30 p.m. already. We better go home and play Bible the board game before taking a group shower. All right. Off
No,
into
the
you.
street lights are on. Got to go inside.
Yeah,
um,
I mean, it's a bit unfair, but
well, I
it's
know,
not.
no,
But it's a certain type of
I'm
person.
making
Yes,
fun, but
yes.
he is he seems like a very nice guy. I mean, two things. First off, is that I agree he's in all likelihood not an asset. I think he's a true believer who's worked in these institutions and so on, and thus isn't a force of destruction. Kind of inherently, that's a fair comment. He is someone who goes along with things. Like I don't think I the degree to which he liked populism or Trump in 2015 or 2016, I think is questionable. And
Yeah. By the way, it was a source of contention during his race in 2016 when he
yeah,
was elected because they have a sort of jungle primary in Louisiana. So he
hmm,
was in the final two with the Democrat, and I think the Democrat initially displaced him, or he was like the first because there were so many Republicans running.
yeah,
And then there was a sort of question of how loyal a Trumpist is Mike Johnson, and it was sort of never satisfactorily answered. I think
right.
in a
But
you
he
know
went along with everything. Like I can imagine him having the same opinion of Trump as David French or JD Vance or something. But then he went along with Trump, and then he ended up writing a strategically defensible version of Stop the Steal, like the kind of brief that will definitely not get you in hot water of any kind, but also the a kind of brief that probably won't really accomplish anything, and then also
yeah.
the
So
kind of
so so
brief
the
where you
stop the steal.
signal to the
Yeah,
people at J6 that you're on their team, but you're kind of not. I mean, there's
so
almost
so the view among the Paul Gosars and the Andy Biggs and the Mo Brookses of the Stop the Steal world, their view was basically that Johnson was unreliable, that Johnson was just yesing them.
Yeah.
So, and maybe that's actually what you do to actually like tamp down these kind of things, right?
Right.
Maybe you actually like subtly kill them by basically yes the people into obedience. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. It's sort of like, we have the benefit of what, 3 or 4 years, I guess 3 years now over the whole 2020 cycle, and it's kind of hard to know how to think about it, while it was happening, right? Like
Yeah.
obviously, there's a number of people who I've spoken with who voted not to certify because their argument was it's a protest vote, right? It's not necessarily an indication that you think it's going to like stop it from happening, right? Do you see what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah. No,
there's
I understand.
yeah,
I think we're just circling around the
yeah.
same. We
But
both
I do
agree.
think that that's an important distinction, right? Because people are calling
Yeah,
them
I agree.
revisionists. I
We
don't know.
agree on the
Yeah,
distinction.
yeah, yeah. Okay,
But
go
I
ahead.
do. So the other thing is that the Jeffrey Sachs, I do use some of these people as weather vane types.
David Sachs,
Right.
not
Well,
Jeffrey.
whatever.
Yeah, same thing,
Um,
same
yeah.
difference. Go ahead.
So he came out against him, and he said something that was, I think, pretty interesting. He said it's a sort of game. So basically, Mike Johnson will talk big on, banning abortion or prayer in school or something. And so he gives off the vibes of being really hardcore. But then on the matters that are more relevant, like, are you going to fund Ukraine? He's just going to kind of go along with everything. And David Sachs says, these new conservatives, we actually want balanced budgets and a America First foreign policy. And he won't give
By the
it to us,
way,
but
in
we think he will.
2016, David Sachs was a major supporter of Hillary Clinton. By
Oh,
the way,
I think David Sachs is yeah. I don't even know. I don't even have quite a word to describe him, but I think he is keyed in. My sense of this is that Mike Johnson is going to fund Ukraine, or David Sachs thinks that's the case,
oh, he
and so
unquestionably is going to
he's
fund
against
Ukraine.
it.
By the way,
Yeah,
yeah, without question.
and
Everybody,
he's
yeah,
not even that old, but he's a kind of spiritual boomer who probably remembers the Cold War kind of thing, and so he can be relied on to do that. I also think that he would be relied on like putting troops on the ground in Israel. Now he might not instigate that, but he might sign off on it. That just is the type of guy he is.
yeah, without question. And by the way, that might actually be a policy that's preferred by the Biden people, right? As a way of keeping the Israelis honest in different ways.
Mm.
So we have to be sort of mindful, you know. And apparently he got along quite well with Anthony Albanese, who's the Prime Minister of Australia. I think that's how you say his surname.
Uh-huh.
So I don't know. I mean, it is very strange to me. I will tell you, when I met him, what came across is that um, he was extremely disciplined. Like he was very like Mr. Rogers, like, oh, so nice to meet you, like
Yeah.
very much in control of himself. And that is not the experience of the other Louisiana politicians that I know, who are a bit more, shall we say, freewheeling.
Yeah.
Um, and he's not that guy, which I found very interesting at the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, any other thoughts on him?
I nothing more than
I'm
that. I
trying to
mean,
be a little bit more hopeful when it comes to Johnson. I mean, why would Gates have endorsed Johnson if he wasn't really America first in some ways? And I'm a little
I
bit
don't
more
know.
hopeful that he doesn't take us to, doesn't
All right.
support Ukraine and he's listening to the American people.
Well, the American people supporting Ukraine, right? So there's that. But yeah, I mean, what does it mean to be America first? I think is an open question as well. But I see that you're kind of new to these spaces, AZ Mama. But yeah, I mean, look, I would just say in general, my sort of read on Gates supporting him is that Gates and he are on House Judiciary together. They know each other. They like each other. And indeed, Matt's wife, Ginger, is kind of that same kind of homeschooler Christian milieu, right? That is sort of like, small evangelical, small C Christian, Bible worship kind of thing, right? That's where Ginger comes out of. And so Ginger has been like very happy about a Speaker Johnson. Now, Ginger's a political person in her own right, so I think that that's important to kind of pay attention to. Um, but it's also very interesting too that Kevin McCarthy was backed heavily by Ginger's brother Palmer Luckey, who of course started Androl and was involved with Oculus, which was sold to Facebook. So there's a lot of kind of family politics as well engaged here. But we should also remember that Matt Gaetz wanted Emmer as well, but Trump obviously didn't. So I find all that very, very interesting and very fascinating. Dana, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I still want to know about the child and where it came from.
I do too. I find that a very interesting question.
Saturday Night Live did a skit on it last night. It was pretty funny. So I don't know if y'all watched it, but
yeah, they said he was a combination, or did they do a skit on the Black Sun?
they did a skit with the Black Sun, but he comes out.
Oh yeah,
after
I
the
saw
fact.
that.
Mike comes out first, the character, and then a black child comes out afterwards, or it's an adult child. But
well, I've watched The Blind Side, or at least I pretended to watch The Blind Side. So there's a certain, Southern culture.
And again,
here
that was a movie, fantasy. Some of it was true, but not really.
Well, it was based on these Southerners.
Do you trust things
want
from
to
Mississippi?
No, I don't trust anything from Mississippi.
The super, super goofy evangelicals, they all want to like raise an NFL athlete or something and declare to God and the world that they are not racist. And yeah, I mean,
we used to call these people conservatives, did we not? I mean,
this is it. Like, apps. I mean, and look, I don't want to go too far into this because it's just so rude, but like, there's a little weird actual cuck vibe coming from this thing. I don't know what to say. That's what Saturday Night Live was referencing.
There that you don't even have to be, a conspiracy theorist. I mean, he was 25, 24 years old when he adopted or got this child.
Yeah, you're 25 and you adopt someone who's 14?
2 years before you're married. So they dated the same amount of time that he had this child with her when they met at the Young Living Ministries. Now, Young Living Ministries has a whole bunch of problems going on right now on its own right.
Yeah, you're not wrong about that. This is very strange, right? To put it mildly.
Especially back in 1997.
Right, but how many 24 or 25-year-olds are predisposed? Well, people who know him say that he's a very strange guy, right? That he's very very, 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 very Christian.
But I want to know where this child's mother was. He was 14 years old. You don't legally just get to. First off, Young Living is not a foster company.
You don't legally do a lot of things. We
don't do a lot of legal. And we need to now figure it out.
Well, the should have question. I mean, look, I think we need to be careful of going to blue and on this stuff, right?
Really? We're talking about a child that didn't belong to him.
Well, we're talking about a child in 1997.
That's right.
Right. Like, we're talking about something that happens. So 1997. I mean, there are people in this space who were not born in 1997.
I understand.
Right? It was a very different world.
Not really.
I was in high school.
That's happening today was happening then. Trust me.
It wasn't like 1957.
I was 9 in 1997.
Okay, but they were still a lot of people going through the church doing the problems that you're talking about today.
I'm saying that these are big claims, right?
I'm not claiming anything. He's the one who claimed this child. I'm just saying I want to know how and why from this ministry that doesn't foster
I agree with
children.
You, and I think you're one of the better researchers out there. So I think you should take it upon yourself and find out. I mean, it is an interesting question.
They don't keep records from those times. That's the problem.
Of course, because because
Yeah,
it's
but they didn't have
Louisiana. It's a miracle
computers.
that
They did everything by.
no, it's a miracle that any of them could even write. Okay, it's Louisiana, for
Do
Christ's
they
sake.
even have the
Now,
internet
I hate to
back on
break
that
it to
night?
you. They could write. Shreveport,
Are you
I know a lot
sure?
about Shreveport.
Yeah,
I know people who live there. I mean,
I'm
All
just
the
telling
files
you
are
that the
sunk down in the
relatives that I
Lord.
swamp.
have in
some of the richest
Shreveport
people,
are.
children on this, the parents on this planet live there. I can tell you that right now.
I'm not trying to be mean about it, but the relatives that I have in
Sorry, Miss
Shreveport
Dana. The
are.
Gators ate up all the records.
Yeah, they did. I have no doubt.
They,
The Gators,
I, I'm
the
just
swamp
saying.
people.
I'm just saying
It's
that
just
I've
who
seen.
does that? What is wrong with the conservatives? Like Amy Coney Barrett is the same
So
way.
is Robert. So is
I
As
John
is as is
Roberts.
I
David
have
French.
very strong
John
suspicions
Roberts
that
has
they
a
were engaged
very
in.
weird way that he adopted his two children, he and his wife.
I'm just saying. I'm saying my experience of this, right? As somebody who is not a redneck, not a cracker, who's very much a Yankee through and through, is that I have been to a number of these like redneck things, and it's sort of like the Angelina Jolie thing. They like worship black children,
Yeah,
and it's
they
a
always
way of
wanted black
basically
babies. You're
showing.
absolutely right. They
Yeah,
even when
it's
they
a
had the Cabbage Patch Kids when they came out with the black ones, all my friends got a black baby. I was like, what the fuck
yes,
is
all the
wrong?
evangelical. You're totally right, and the
It's
number
like
of
Get
people.
Out, but real.
How many
Yes,
black? Hey, Dana, how many black Cabbage Patch Kids did you
I
have
didn't have a black cabbage. I didn't even
with
have a
no
Cabbage
ID
Patch
cards?
child. They were too weird looking to
They
me.
were trafficked to you.
I wasn't
I'm
into
kidding.
baby dolls. Those are really creepy.
I'm just telling you, the number. I mean, I am thinking back to a second cousin of mine, who had a black Barbie, and she was like a little white girl, and this was just the. This is as it
But
was
but but
down
but
This
there,
but,
is
but a
getting
and
really
doll
weird.
and a real live 14-year-old man or young man? Come
well, no,
on.
they're all kind of the
They're
same,
treated
No,
the
I
same.
they're
understand.
Yeah.
kind
Y'all,
of the
I'm from
same.
the South. Please, I understand these
Yes, but you're
people.
from the
No,
south
we
in a
will not
way.
stop.
You're
Look,
you're
I
from the
want a
south in a
DNA test
way.
on that child. I don't, does he know his real mother? We should know that.
I mean, who the fuck
Well, I
knows?
think we
I
should
got an
know.
idea, Charles.
Yeah, Pimize them.
Now I'm going to call my aunt who taught for like 40 years in a suburb of Atlanta. Um, and she would. I'm going to get her opinion of it.
It's very strange. Let's
Look
just
up
put it
Young
that way.
Living
But
Ministries and get back to me, okay? Because
but
that's
you know,
Well,
I
to
went.
Dana, don't do stuff like that. Give us the accusation. Like
I did. I
what
gave
are
it to
The
you.
the
Oh, I
the
gave it to you the other
accusation
night.
is that
Sorry.
there's lots of human trafficking that goes on through these evangelical outfits
100%.
that are it's not wrong. I mean, we see the agape Christian
Oh, it's all through
situation
my
in
state. It's all
Missouri.
through
We
my
see,
state.
yes,
So what
but
are
then
they
there's
trafficking them for? Or is
because
it
they
for
want
sex or
children.
labor
No,
or what?
it
Both. It could be
depends.
anything.
It depends. There's a lot of women in the South that want larger families that they can't have for whatever reason, right?
Uh-huh.
Either they can't have more kids because they're old, or because they just there's just like a lot of that that goes
Sure.
on in the South. Okay, like it's a thing. It's something you see when you go down there. Like I remember very distinctly going to a second cousin's of mine's wedding, and there were like a whole bunch of like black people there that were like raised by white people, and God only knows how that happened, right? Like it's like gauche to even ask down there. It's just sort of because they'll say, "Oh, it's my son, this." You're like, "What the fuck are you talking about?" But like that's how it is there.
Well, the man who wrote
Now,
Forrest Gump is from my town. I was born and raised with him as well. He died during COVID, not because of COVID, but during COVID. His wife is my age, and he was 28 years older than she was. But they have a child. So just know that Forrest, his name is Winston Groom, and he is, he wrote about that.
but there is so much stuff that's very innocuous down in the South too on this stuff. So we have to be very careful about this, right? Because we don't know the
I'm
real
not
story.
accusing him of anything. I just want some tests.
I'm just telling you, like the stories that I've heard about the Matt Gaetz situation, right, where Matt Gaetz has effectively raised this Cuban, brother of a girlfriend that he loved as his own flesh and blood. Like I've met Nestor, like I've had conversations with him, right? So I'm just saying that what happened there was pretty
Is
innocuous and
Nestor
pretty
his
innocent.
flesh and blood? That's the issue.
No.
No, no, he's not.
Well,
Okay. Well,
okay.
why are they
To be
raising
fair,
this?
he did bring him up on Fox News out of the blue. He never talked about Nestor
No, what
That's
before.
happened was that they
bizarre.
were in a fight with Cedric Richmond, because Cedric Richmond said, "You don't know what it's like. You don't know what it's like to raise to raise a child of color." And he took umbrage at that because Matt like loves Nestor as his
Sure.
own, and the whole story there is more interesting, which is that Nestor, he was dating Nestor's sister. They were Nestor's sister was living with them.
Which is all very weird.
Um,
They bought her a BMW. It was a little weird. Come
well,
on.
no,
It is weird.
it's
I'm sorry.
is it weird?
Yes,
I
Yes.
it's
mean, I don't
totally
It
know.
is
weird, and
very
it
weird.
easily plays into the
She's from
notion
another
that Nestor.
country, for crying out loud. We're not even talking about somebody from from Florida. She's from another
Well, no,
country.
she sort of grew up. Well, no, she sort of grew up in Florida. Her
Her
father was
mother
an
and father
American
both were
citizen.
from Cuba.
Her father was an American citizen who
That's
ran out
fine,
on
but
the
he still
family.
was born in Cuba.
Hold on, I'm explaining the story because not everybody
Okay.
knows it. All right, so let's just give the chronology here and let's get it correct. So the basic story, is that what happened was that Gates was dating this woman. I think her name was May.
Yes, it is.
And she had a mother back in Cuba, and she had a father who was an American citizen,
In
living
Miami.
basically
Yep,
in
that's right.
Miami, and that he was. They basically, he had separated from the mother and the father, and was basically. No, Thomas, let's not boot him. So he was basically, the father was abusive towards Nestor,
Sure.
and May and Gates were living. Gates at the time was in this legislature, and basically the 12-year-old, 11-year-old, Nestor came to live with them in a spare bedroom, and Gates basically paid for his tuition,
But she
and
was
because he
living
didn't
there
want
when
him to
she
go back.
was 15 and they bought her a car at 16. It is a BMW at that. Come on. A little weird. It was a
I
little
mean,
weird.
the family is very,
I
very
know that.
rich.
I have
There's
neighbors
like,
that's next door to
and
them.
by the way,
Trust
I
me, I
think it was
know.
a used BMW. Not that these things matter, but it was like a used
It
BMW. Like, let's just be
looks
like,
brand new to me in the picture, just saying.
I think it, well, I'm just, I think it's a little bit much, right? So we need to be very kind of cautious on this because this is,
But
but anyway, the
she
point
was
I'm
15
making here,
living in their home. Oh, how is that
well,
normal?
no,
Then she
I
gets
mean,
drunk and
I
almost
don't
wrecks
know
her
that she was
car.
15 living in there. I don't know that she was 15 living in their
Yes, it
home.
says
Like,
it on the
anything.
thing when they gave her the happy birthday car. I vetted all this, and you
All
filled
right,
it
well,
in
put
for
this
me,
up.
so I appreciate it. I do want the
Put it
truth.
up in the jumbotron. I mean, I do know that they're rough contemporary. Basically, she was Matt's first real
Yes,
girlfriend.
I
You
do
could
know
say that's
that.
what he's
I
real.
gotcha.
And they were like, they lived
Yeah,
together. She, I think, moved to Vegas or something. But anyway, the point is, like, it's not like this crazy thing of his like gay
I
lover.
understand.
I
I
mean,
get it.
there were all these crazy things that the Israelis said about me and Matt being homosexual together. And by the way, I must tell you, like, we were supposedly doing like meth and cocaine together as homosexuals, which I have not. I'm not really into meth or homosexual sex. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's not really my bailiwick. So anyway, the point I'm making is that there's a lot of these things that are strange modern family, blended family
True.
relationships
Agreed.
that are kind of deserving of more careful
Totally
inquiry
agree.
than just kind of going a little crazy on these
Totally
things.
agree.
Would be the way I would describe
And
it.
that's all I'm asking is
Um,
that we find out the facts, and then we can
I do
help put
think
it
it
to
is a
rest for
relevant
him.
question when we have somebody who's second in line to the president of the United States, the oldest president we've ever had. I do think it is a relevant question to ask, like, what the fuck is going on here? So I'm with you on that. And I do think that he should explain, we should know who Mike Johnson is. I think that that's a very important question, especially given that, like, many members of Congress I know who voted for him barely knew who he was. So I think there's this question of a vetting, I think, is very, very important. But I think it should be done carefully and with
Totally
respect.
agree.
Anyway, let's go to Larry. Let's go to Larry real quick. Welcome, Larry.
Oh, hey there, guys. Thanks for having me. I'm from Toronto, Ontario. Don't hold that against me. I don't play hockey, and we get as much sunlight as New York State. Anyway, I'm an advocate for the cannabis industry. I invest in it, and I'd just like to know what you guys think about Kevin Johnson. What's his position on that? Is he for it or against it? Are you guys ever going to legalize that?
We need to
Yeah, no, thank
ban
you.
your entire industry and arrest everyone involved with it, including
I'm not
yourself.
necessarily that hardcore on it, but I do think that, if you're calling him Kevin Johnson when his name's Mike Johnson, and you're talking about cannabis and you're from Canada and you're weighing in on American politics, no, thank you, sir. I hope you have a very lovely
Well,
day.
Canada did get
And
legal before we did, and he is fair to ask it because it tied in with our stock
no,
market,
he's
and he
not.
said he
He's
invested
not
in it.
really. No, he's not really fair to ask anything about anything involving American politics because
Oh,
it's
maybe
not his
not
country.
politics. Well, he probably just he might is he in, never mind. I understand why he asked it, but I get it.
We don't need to have weed heads in
I
these
get you.
spaces. No, no, thank you. You can, as a private indulgence, you want to smoke some crack, you want to Hunter Biden style, you want to do some weed. That's between you and your doctor and your dealer, as far as I'm concerned. But it's not something that I want to talk about because it's obviously not one of the more pressing issues that the Republic's facing. Let's go ahead, Mr. Anglo. Mr. Anglo Acadian. My God, man, if you're a Canadian, I'm going to kick you out. I swear to God.
No comment. Are you familiar with Irwin Cotler and his ongoing effects in Congress?
Irwin Cotler. Who's this?
He is the former Attorney General of Canada and the head of the Railway.
Oh, good Lord. Good Lord. Goodbye, Canadians. No, 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 no.
Why are these people entering spaces?
I have been attracting Canadians over the last like 6 weeks, and I don't know if it's like a pheromone thing or something. They can just like send, but they keep joining my spaces and like sending me emails or something, and I don't understand why it is, and I don't want to know. I just want them to stop bothering me, but they just keep doing it, and it's like having a raccoon problem or something. I swear to God. If this is another Canadian, I swear to God, Tom. No, we're not letting anyone up unless we can prove that they're a son of the American Revolution.
Or
You
they
know,
don't ask us these random, like,
good
weird
Lord.
questions about
All
people
right,
we've never heard of.
let's move on. I kind of vaguely know who Irwin Kotler is, and we'll kind of go there in a second. But so I wanted to say, so we were chatting earlier, Tom, about like who is the scapegoat? What is the scapegoat going into the 2024 election? And it seems to me that the Republicans want it to be Biden himself, right? He's old, he's infirm, he's corrupt, right? Even though there's not really any real evidence for that claim. And then the Republicans want it to be the border, right? And the illegal immigrants and, all these illegals coming in, and they could be Hamas, right? They could be this, they could be that. My contention is that the scapegoat on the Democrat side needs to be foreign espionage and foreign spies, possibly billionaire oligarchs who are connected to foreign spies. But my contention is that that's ultimately what is kind of more pressing. And my suspicion, for what it's worth, is that Biden will do some big bill, and that big bill that he does will have internal enforcement in it for the immigration issue. So it'll be some like big immigration, Ukraine, Israel bill, basically. And it'll all be kind of swept under the sort of question of American sovereignty or security or whatever, so, defending democracy or some such. That'll be kind of my read on how it goes down. That's kind of my sense of it. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Richard or Thomas or.
There's no doubt that the GOP wants to scapegoat Biden. I think he might very well be scapegoated successfully. Now, I don't think the GOP, they're not going to be the ones to do it because their commentary is very typical. You've heard it all before. They make these non sequiturs like, we can't even start talking about Ukraine until we solve the border issue and, blah, blah, blah. They will do that, and I don't think that will work. But I think we're in a very, very dangerous situation in terms of Biden's future. I think he absolutely, he's in a weird situation in the sense of, strong majorities of Democrats don't want to actually send weapons into Israel. And even 45% of Republicans are wary of this. So it's actually the world has turned on that issue. And I
Yes,
know
and
it's
I think this was something Thomas and I were talking about, and I wrote a piece a few days ago. Maybe we'll put that up in the jumbotron about the differences between the older generations and the younger generations when it comes to
Oh
Israel,
yeah.
right? And I think basically the older generations see them as oppressed, right? And we see them as oppressor, right?
Right.
And I think that that's like the fundamental distinction. And I also think that there are a number of us who've been attacked or lied about or targeted by Israeli intelligence in the United States, and have had our careers interfered with or our own physical safety interfered with. And certainly, I think if you're working in technology or you're working in sort of public opinion formation, you've encountered this problem. And it's real, like it's not a joke, and it's not, you're not crazy to think it. Like there are Israeli spies and people who are fifth columnists within the United States. Some of them, wealthy people, some of them very powerful people. And they do try to fuck with you in all these elaborate ways. Whether you're Jim McGreevey being blackmailed on being a homosexual, the governor of New Jersey by Jared Kushner's father, Charles Kushner. Whether you're, Matt Gaetz being targeted by the Israelis because you voted the wrong way on the so-called, on the Iran situation. So I think like a lot of us are like sick of their shit, basically. And my kind of view, just generally over the last few years, has been, I'm tired of all these technologies being pioneered on a bunch of Palestinians and then deployed against me personally. Like, no Palestinian has ever hacked my phone. Like, I think the worst thing a Palestinian has ever done is made me a kebab that I didn't particularly care for, right? Like, they don't
Yeah.
bother me. They just sort of do their thing. And this notion that I should care and that like Hamas is ISIS. Well, if this is true, like why is Netanyahu funding them? What's that all about? And the fact that that's like verboten from, we're not even allowed to have that conversation in the United States is to me a tell that our media is so deeply compromised. And you look at all the television networks in the United States, and they are very like pro, Netanyahu. They are very pro. To the extent they criticize him, they only criticize him in a specific way. And
Yeah.
I just don't think this is tenable any longer. And I think that
Well, I agree with that. I agree. It's no longer tenable because the world has moved on, and these institutions, these legacy institutions, haven't. They're still kind of like stuck in 2003 on some level, and that is a
so we have to ask ourselves, why is that, right? Like, what is that? Why is that happening, right? So, like, um, I'm 35 years old. You're well into your 40s, and Tom's in his 40s, and it's like we seemingly are stuck in a discourse about Israel that's like right after 2002, 2003. And I just don't think, like, the whole argument that we used to make for the Israelis is that they were good at security, they were good at intelligence, they were competent, right? And this was their propaganda, right? That they were super competent, super safe, and whatever. And that's just obviously not true after they just allowed a whole bunch of their countrymen to be slaughtered, right? Um, and that was clearly, if you believe, there's sort of competing narratives here, but one narrative is that their intelligence, failed, right? So then the question is like, they're mere mortals. They're not better than us. We don't necessarily need to respect them on security matters. And in fact, they may actually not be that good at it. They may actually be a real problem in a lot of ways. So that's sort of one. The other one, which is I think more sinister, and I actually happen to believe much more credibly, is that Netanyahu allowed them to be slaughtered as a way of basically shoring up his support domestically. And I think that that's more credible as far as we're concerned here. But I think basically the problem and the post that I laid out about Turkey is kind of similar to this, which is I think we have this problem where we have a bunch of people in Israel that all of the the Richard Hananias, the JD Vances, the Peter Thiels simp for, which are my birth rates. Israel's got a high birth rate, right, or whatever. And it's like no. The people who are stooping their old lady studying Torah all day, getting paid welfare payments, they have a high birth rate, right? But all the normal Israelis, like the kind of Israelis that you would encounter in real life, they are basically like just as secular, just as boring as the rest of us, right? And they're the ones who are actually taking up the duties and responsibilities of serving in the military and of defending these 500,000 settlers in the West Bank. And so they're the very fact that like a week before this, contretemps or incursion or whatever you want to call it on the border of Gaza, a week before this took place, there was a discussion about what are we going to do about all these ultra orthodox who are effectively having shitloads of children and not serving in the military and getting paid, basically welfare all day. What are we going to do about them? And the attitude was that we're going to need to draft them at some point just to meet our soldier commitments. And that's obviously not happening. But it's interesting that they moved the troops to protect a bunch of Netanyahu's settler allies right around the Jewish high holidays. And then what happens is that they leave the border with Gaza defenseless, and everybody gets slaughtered, right? I mean, that's basically the timeline. And by the way, what I've just said there, like you will not see that in a mainstream. You will not see that on you will not see that basically anywhere in mainstream discourse in the United States. Like you won't see that shit on CNN. You won't talk. They won't be talked about on CBS. There won't be. And meanwhile, in Israel, these things are front page of Haaretz. They're even being talked about in Times of Israel. I mean, we have Israeli politicians, Israeli tech executives, members of Netanyahu's own coalition that are saying that he should resign. So we have this like real disconnect where the Israelis don't want to be living under a Zionist-occupied government, basically. And the Israelis are pointing out that 90% of the revenue that comes to Netanyahu's political party comes from outside of the state of Israel. So we have these like real problems here. And yet we're sort of not allowed to talk about this in the United States. We have to treat this like it's another 9/11, it's another whatever. And I frankly just resent it. Like, I've got to be honest with you. I resent being forced to be this stupid. And at a certain point, like, I think a lot of our, Arab friends and Muslim friends and others, they are a faster growing ethnic group in the United States than these sort of like weird Zionist shills. Increasingly, a lot of Jews in America are shifting on this issue. A lot of the younger Jews are kind of, where mainstream opinion is among the youth, which is that Palestine is an oppressed people. And I think it's just reaching a point now where it's just like it's become a kind of caricature. And I don't know. I mean, what's your sense, Richard? And then we'll go to Dana.
I agree with everything you've said. I mean,
Good Lord, what's happening? We're agreeing too often.
Right. Well, I'll try to disagree so the conversation will be sharper. But yeah, I mean, but this is the problem: is that the world has moved on, but the security state hasn't, and the mainstream media hasn't. So I will basically take some of your suggestions, but I kind of think they're wishful thinking in the sense of like, well, we might want people there to kind of restrain the Israelis, or Biden's, hugging Bibi close so that he can.
This is the argument, by the way, that the Biden people make. I don't know that I buy this, but let's assume.
It's fair enough. I'm listening to it, but I'm not fully convinced.
I'm not persuaded by it either. By the way, I think that basically, I think that this is actually, I think, one of the great mistakes of the Biden presidency.
Right. Yeah. And so he has at least rhetorically, he has fully backed Israel and treated Israel like Ukraine, which I think is just absurd. But
yeah, I've got to say, Matt Duss made this argument, which is that when Biden gave that speech comparing Hamas's incursion into Israel with Russia's incursion into Russia, my view for what that was worth was that was a huge error. And because what the Ukraine conflict is really about is about the self-determination of the Ukrainian people to be a free and independent state. And we are on the side, we are defenders of liberty everywhere, but we're only custodian of our own. So we're a fan of basically people taking the responsibilities of their own self-government in hand. And the Gazans have basically, and the Palestinians generally, have been denied their self-determination. And the world has looked the other way on it because it's more convenient to basically make the Israelis happy. And we've looked the other way because it's easier than having a conversation about the 2.2 million, Palestinians and how they're treated. And effectively, the contours of the art of the deal, under Netanyahu and Jared Kushner, was basically like, fuck the Palestinians. Let's just go cut deals with the Arabs who have money.
Right.
And I just don't think that is at all morally defensible. And I also just don't think it works because, if you go to Gaza, I've been to Gaza, and I don't know if anyone else has been here and wants to talk about it, but it's like an extremely unpleasant, miserable place. And it doesn't have to be that way, but it is. And the Israelis encourage it and want it that way. And many of the members of Netanyahu's coalition have a fantasy about ethnically cleansing them. I know Tom's been pointing out that one of the guys who was picked up on after 9/11, one of the Israelis, the dancing Israelis, is basically calling for the ethnic cleansing of Gaza. Right? I don't know if Tom, you want to put that up in the
It's
chat.
what they're going to do. Look.
No, but is it what we're going to allow them to do or not? Because I'm going to be honest with you, if they ethnically cleanse the Gazans, right? Like, why should we tolerate any of their assets operating here? Because they're not going to stop with the Palestinians, right? Like, there is a greater Israel that these people fantasize about that's effectively from Cairo all the way to Baghdad. And that's a reality. And like there's a kind of supremacism here that is extremely dangerous for world peace.
I disagree with all of y'all, by the way. I don't think you're saying this right.
All right, then explain to me how I'm getting it wrong.
I think you're right.
I'd love to be wrong about it.
I think you've been saying it already, but you're backtracking a little bit. So
I totally agree. I don't think it's Biden.
It's totally not Biden, but here's what I'm going to say. You mentioned and already said that we who are all in the same reading on what we're researching and reading, and of course some of you know a lot more than we do because we're not professionals, but I do believe that he called Ben Netanyahu called it his 9/11 for a reason, because he planned this just like he planned our 9/11. And I believe, like you said earlier, he planned the murdering of his own people. He pays Hamas. Hamas is basically IDF on steroids. And if there's no way that
I don't think you're wrong about this. Okay, go on, because I think this is interesting. Yeah,
okay,
go
so
on.
if you have Pegasus in an NSO group and you've been running cartels from Mexico, and there's 150, by the way, cartels in Mexico. All I know is that the Sinaloa cartel has it, but I would imagine several other cartels have it as well. And if they have it, and the Chinese people that live in our country, who are neighbors, by the way, have it, then I can only imagine that Hamas has it, and that there aren't bombs already planned in all of these tunnels. And there's not much Joe Biden can do. He didn't cause this. He's the president. Any president would be stuck in this situation.
But let me put it differently. So here's what I would have liked him to have done, right? Like,
well, but they're probably saying, hey, if you don't agree with this, or at least be cordial, we'll blow them up. I mean,
then maybe, look, here's the way I would put this. When Netanyahu came to the United States on several occasions, he could have been arrested by our president.
I totally agree with you on that.
We know that there are many examples of Biden effectively looking the other way.
He would have been a martyr, though.
Stuff. I don't think he would have been. I mean, he's deeply unpopular in Israel. And, I think it would have top-sided a number of his assets here in the United States.
But the world needed to see it. And now the world sees it, and they're speaking.
Well, the hope was that the Biden people had was that the Israelis themselves would have gotten rid of Netanyahu.
Which they haven't.
And I think that hope is a false hope. I think it's a fake hope. And that, we should be, look, Netanyahu is a threat to the security and safety of Americans, whether it's the people being killed by the cartels because of Pegasus, whether it's our assets that are being harmed all around Africa. He's a menace. And in my view, Biden has a responsibility to arrest him and detain him and take him down.
But if he's it's strategic. We're not just dealing with Ben Netanyahu. We're dealing with all of his regimes that he's helped build over the last 50, 60 years. we're dealing with other countries that have different opinions for one reason or the other, whether it's financial, emotional, or spiritual, religion, whatever.
Right. I mean, I suppose you could make the case. So this is the strong man argument of which you're talking about, right? Steel man argument, I guess, is the parlance. Is that if we take him down, we will actually disrupt a whole powder keg, and that basically, if he's brought down, this whole network will basically go
Well, I
crazy
think that we
and
already have it to
hyperventilate.
where it can be taken down, but you have to do this strategically because Netanyahu planned this. And I believe that, wasn't it 4 countries, including us, that let Israel
Well,
know?
it is interesting, right? So we have Robert Menendez is brought down, and
Yep.
he's very pro the Israelis. We
Gala.
have Kevin McCarthy brought down. We have Speaker Johnson coming in, and he's effectively singing a different tune, right, in many respects, so than he was singing just a few weeks back. So yeah, I think it's interesting, but fair enough. I'll take your point, Dana. Let's have other people speak. Let's have Mohammed speak. Welcome, Mohammed.
Hi, good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
My regards from New Jersey. I love your space, and I really, really, I'm from the generation, and hi to everybody. I'm from the generation I born '69, so I really know what Israel is. I was 4 years old when the war was there. I felt it. I don't have memory about it, but I felt it. And Israel, they built in a big lie. Like America, they built on the fears. They scare us. Like every from once in a while, they create a ghost and they have to scare us. Like it started with the Cold War. After that, Taliban. After that, Bin Laden, ISIS, so on and so on, and COVID. So they always keep us in our toes. Um, if they
Yeah,
arrest
I think you're
Netanyahu,
not wrong. I mean, there's that history of Menachem Begin saying that he was, one of the leaders of terrorism around the world, right? And I think you're not wrong about that. That there's a certain element
we
of
have
creating
to.
a
We
boogeyman.
live we live day by day on fears. If you don't pay your bill, you will be boom. You will if you pay your taxes, if you don't pay the insurance. So we always in like running in a circle like a rat, and that's how they control us. This is the new way for slavery. You have to be slave, but not the ugly way, and they not be looks uncivilized. No, we can still slave you, gentle way and civilized way, so nobody can say that, oh, we bad people, we slaves people. So it's always lie, it's always fear. The lie that, oh,
Yeah, I think you're not wrong there. Yeah, I mean
yeah,
that's a good point.
we the best army ever on this earth. Bullshit. Some hose and
I
little
will say
water.
the thing that I've become much more so I've met a lot of Israelis over the last like 5 years or so, and the propaganda about their own capabilities is really intense. And they're supposedly all these tech geniuses, and yet their products don't work all that well. And there's just like a lot of vaporware
they
around the
ke-
Israelis.
they lie to themselves till the point they be very, very arrogant, and they forgot even it's just a lie. Like you see Barlev, bunch of like they're not that sophisticated that time like the America and Israel, and they came with the idea that bunch of hoses and knock down all Barlev, and they cross the other side of Sinai, and it was very surprised for everybody. It's the history beat themselves. It's just the same way like these guys from Hamas. They under all, it's like in a prison. They have no resources, nothing. Even they using the pipes, they using the old steels from the ship sinked in the on the Mediterranean Sea. They cut the metals, and they make missiles, and that it's a miracle. Let's face it. Look at it as how these people, like, without
No, I
being
mean,
biased, How
certainly
these
they.
people can do that miracle things and cross the line
I
for
don't think it's a miracle. Like you're a bit older than I am. So have you heard of Rafiq Natshi? Are you familiar with this individual?
educate me. Educate me. I don't know.
I just like you make it sound like they're just not capable of fighting war when I believe they're backed by Saudi Arabia and some
No, I
pretty.
mean, look, there's a long history of
They're not backing
different
from
countries.
anybody. They're not.
No.
Nobody
No.
back
I
them.
don't know that that's. I don't know that that's right. I'll bring you down, Mohammed, and I'll have you back up in a second if you want. But because, but I think that basically, I don't think that's quite correct. There's lots of countries that have brought a number of resources into Gaza over the years, and whether that's Turkey, like through the Turkish intelligence, whether that's Iran, where the Israelis seemingly want to make it all about Iran because of course they want to like continue that whole conflict with Iran and fear mongering around that. So I think there's more going on there. But let's go to Toby real quick.
Hey, I got something real quick,
Yeah, go
Charles.
ahead, Thomas.
So to your earlier point about, how this actually happened, I came across this article in like an Israeli publication online. And what it does is they interview one of the event promoters from, the rave.
Yes.
Goes by the name M, because they want to stay anonymous for this story or whatever. But they thought about a month before the event happened that their phone had been hacked, either through I think WhatsApp or Facebook. They weren't sure. They reported it, and the phone was given to Shin Bet, and the person that gave them the phone said nothing. They didn't get like followed up with or anything like that. And that story I think came out like 10 days ago, and I haven't, I haven't looked to see if there's been updates, but
Yeah, put that up in the jumbotron.
yeah,
Thomas,
it is.
if you
It's
have it.
up there now. Yeah.
Yeah. So what is this piece here? It's the question arises as to how the Hamas terrorists knew how to get to the site of the incident and whether they had prior information about the location. Oh, interesting. M, who helped produce the party, told N12 that a few weeks ago he suspected that his Facebook account had been hacked, but he believed that it was the police or maybe drug-related matters. Oh, interesting. I was questioned about the phone. I have not yet received a final update on what is happening with it, but the investigation has been transferred to Shin Bet. I mean, the police, they have nothing to do with it. So Shin Bet is like their equivalent of the FBI. And Shin Bet is actually one of the organizations that's been the most critical of Netanyahu within Israel. That they've seen Netanyahu as a mobster criminal type. Very interesting. Very good find, Tom.
Yeah, and the last point of that is there was like a lot of chatter, and I heard people talking in spaces that it was like 2 days before the rave happened that the location was changed to where it was at, right next to where it was. So again, you don't ever hear anything reported on it, and there's been a little bit of information. That's why
Well,
I picked
well,
that
we
out.
should note that just generally the Netanyahu world wants a black market, right? They like a
Yes.
black market with Iran. They want a black market with Saudi Arabia. So that's very important for them generally. But let's go to Toby real quick. Welcome, Toby.
Hey, thank you, Charles. Always good to listen to you, gentlemen and ladies, and to hear you in Tech News Rental. So, Charles, what is your thoughts on this? It's hard to believe that our administration and our Security Council didn't know that this attack was going to happen, and I just find it hard to believe that Bibi and Netanyahu, Bibi didn't know that there was an attack that was imminent. And it kind of reminds me when I read the book where the book is called Where All Men Win Glory, and it was written by John Krakow, um, who's written a lot of adventure books. The movie Into the Wild was based on a book that he wrote.
Oh yeah, I remember reading that. Yep.
Characters, and he did a really interesting book which talked about Pat Tillman and
Yes. Yes, and all the stuff around whether or not he was killed by friendly fire, and it turns out he was killed by friendly
yeah,
fire, and all the cover-ups
right.
around that. Yeah.
And so so in the book it goes into Pat when he's an early lad in junior high, and while he's talking about Pat, he's also educating you on the Middle East. So by the time Pat and his brother, who his brother was a minor league professional baseball player that had a lot of prospects of going to the major leagues, they both joined. And by the time their feet are on the ground, you have this real sense of what transpired in the history, and now they're there in the middle of this thing. And in the book, it speaks very clearly that Bush was aware more than several times that we were being threatened by an imminent attack. And to me, it's the old.
Well, I will say this. So I've talked with a lot of people who knew and who were involved in like Arab circles and Israeli circles, and there was a lot of chatter about an attack. But the question is, where was the attack coming? How was it going to happen? So I think you have to kind of put yourself back to that period. But I do think we did know that there was some sort of attack that was coming for the Israelis. We just didn't know where it was going to be. And even if we had known that there was going to be an attack, what should have happened, right?
Right.
Very, very
Yeah,
unclear.
then the reason is because I'm a retired firefighter paramedic, and I was on duty in Orange County, Florida during 9/11, and we had a terrorist book that was distributed through all the fire departments, and on the cover of the book was the World Trade Center, and all about secondary.
Well, that's disturbing.
So when I was in my office, I was lieutenant, and everybody's like, "Oh, my, a plane!" The TV's always on fire stations. We're always watching news, and there's always good rambunctious discussion on politics and fire stations. So the plane struck the first building, and we knew that there was going to be another attack because that's what they train us. You get people inside the buildings, you get them responding, you get them in more, and then you have another attack.
Yeah, there was. I mean, we've done spaces in the past, Toby, about 9/11. I think Tom may have some of those spaces recorded
Yeah.
even, and we've gone very hard on them in the past. And yeah, look, I mean, obviously, I think there's a lot more on the 9/11 topic than has been
I didn't
disclosed.
want to.
And I actually,
I thought,
you know, just to put a point
yeah,
on this, there are lots of us who've been calling for a long, long time to declassify
right.
everything around 9/11, right? And the people who tend to oppose that the most are Israeli connected in different ways. They want it just to be everything about Saudi Arabia. They don't want the whole file
Yeah.
released. And when I spoke to some of my friends in the Biden White House about and I said this by the way to Yair Lapid's people when I was in Israel last year. I said, back when it was his government, I was like, you should just declassify everything you know about Netanyahu's involvement with 9/11.
Mhm.
And they sort of hemmed and hawed about it and thought about it. But in the case of the Biden people, they're like, well, what if we just did everything about the JFK assassination? And they put out about all this stuff about Reuben Efron. And Reuben Efron was a Likud supporter that knew about the assassination of JFK and seemingly was involved in monitoring Oswald and all of
Well,
that. So
my
yeah, go ahead.
just finish quickly is it's in my opinion, just of listening to everybody and just kind of just putting a sense on this, that we knew this attack was going to come, that maybe this attack in Israel was going to be the beginning downfall of Israel, but they didn't really see, there really wasn't any, it really was a massive attack. Maybe they didn't think it was going to be that um, destructive,
Yeah,
and that
I mean,
all.
I imagine. I think that's probably right. I mean, look, I don't know that we. I mean, look, there's always this question of how do you actually prevent these kind of things, even if you know about them? How do you mitigate them? There's always this sort of hindsight bias problem here, which I think is worth thinking through.
Yeah,
I
they
would
were
say,
supposedly training like for like a year and would have like how you could have trained for that without, with the massive amount of surveillance that they have and like that everybody has that's watching everything, especially like with these glider contraptions, which by the way, like the first one of those I guess came in from a German individual that sold them into Hamas like 3 or 4 months ago.
That's very interesting, John, because Germany and the Dutch and them, they were funding like Peace Now and pro-Palestinian state but then suddenly kind of turned their eye and stuff to what's going on. But that's really interesting that you said Germany was involved.
Yeah, and then there's also, if you go back and research 9/11, there's a lot of deep lore about the Hamburg cell that's
Yep.
documented that you can read about.
Yeah,
So
and of course
I
the East Germans in particular, have always been heavily involved in doing favors for Netanyahu over the years, and there's a
lovely.
lot of like history there as well. That's, Schultz is sort of more on the CIA side of things and less on the Netanyahu side of things. But
No, but to like Toby's point, you start hearing certain terms bantied about again, which was, I think I heard somebody say, "Oh, you could never imagine this happen," uh, which was something that was said like a talking point over and over after 9/11. And then you would hear, "Oh, intelligence failure," and how many times have we heard that? So it's like it was kind of weird the way you can draw certain parallels, at least to the way that the media talks about this. It's very
So, Tom,
it's
like, do you think this could have something to do with maybe Europe, Germany, or any of those countries wanting to back out of the war, like with Ukraine, and they're using this as kind of an excuse? Because lawyers in the Netherlands and Dutch were saying, that this is hypocritical. It's a double standard because we should deploy all efforts to put an end to the illegal occupation of Palestinian territories, just like they're doing in Ukraine, right? So maybe a couple of European countries are kind of
yeah,
conflicting
well, I
in
thought it
terms.
was
no. I
interesting,
think
wasn't
I
it?
think
Like
that
the
ultimately,
Brandenburg Gate, like being in the Israeli flag colors. I thought that was very interesting, right? So the Brandenburg Gate, a lot of the stuff that goes on there is it's very East German connected, right?
Like the liberal side, you mean? Like you think maybe like the liberal, maybe
No, I think that basically the East Germans, who dominate a lot of the intelligence services in Germany and who dominate a lot of the economy, I think that they want to continue business as usual with the Russians, right? They want to basically rebuild Nord Stream. They want to basically get all that cheap gas into the Russia or to the German economy. And so this Hamas story presents an opportunity to effectively it presents a very interesting opportunity, right? And the interesting opportunity is to is effectively to no longer have to deal with having to ask tough questions of the Russians, right? And of basically the Ukraine conflict. And I think that is, and of course, the Germans get a double effect, right? They can say, oh, we love the Jews, we love Israel, 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 Israel. We're not Nazis anymore. Therefore, we don't have to get harmed in all these ways, right? So that's sort of the way to think about it. At least that's how I've kind of taken it. I think I think Dana has convinced me a bit on the. We don't really know what's going on privately. Like Biden went over there, presumably said a lot of things in person that couldn't be said otherwise. We know that Biden has always been very skeptical of the Israelis and of Netanyahu in particular. So there may have been a lot of things that were said in private that we are obviously not privy to. So I think that there's a lot more going on there. I also think, it's not the USS Liberty time anymore. We have two aircraft carriers there monitoring everything, which are, that's a very powerful thing to do. So I guess what I would just say generally is I'm more or less convinced that we reached peak Israel during the Trump presidency and that we're more or less in the kind of end game around it now would be the way I would
So,
frame it.
Charles,
I'm more concerned about the people that are planning things maybe outside of Israel right now in other countries.
Oh, like in our country, yeah, absolutely.
Well, I'm talking about more over on the other side of the world, but there's a lot of pieces to be mixed around. I
Oh,
mean, wasn't there
I
an
think
Israeli
we
plane that
are.
just landed in Russia somewhere, and now
I
they're
think we are in a very interesting position right now because there's lots of ways to think of the Ukraine war in this context,
100%.
which is that maybe the Hamas conflict with Israel gives an out for the various belligerents in Ukraine to kind of come to the negotiating table. And indeed, that's kind of like what we're hearing through the grapevine, right? Is that there's peace talks or potential peace talks going on with Ukraine and Russia right now.
Biden
So
looks like the master to me. Sorry, he does not look like the weakling. He
I don't
looks
know.
like he is the master.
My view on this is that I think that the president's words have a tremendous weight and ought not be misused. And I've
He's
watched that
being
speech.
strategic.
Yes, but I've watched that speech several times, and it's morally very confusing. You know,
Well, I think it comes down to too that we're talking about that Biden understands what's really going on inside the Jewish community. There's more than just there's different types of religious Jews, and they have different levels. And then you have the Zionist Jews, and we kind of
yeah. Look, Richard and I think you've talked about this before, which is that you know that basically Zelensky is the Ukraine is the new Israel, basically. And if you have Ukraine as the new Israel, then it follows that the old Israel might act up because they want our attention again, right? And that's really what Netanyahu wants. He wants everybody's attention focused on Israel, laundering money, strategically important, integrating into our tech stack, the binational security state, all of that jazz. I think, though, just basic bitch on this, my read on it is that I think that the Israelis are not really going to be permitted much more space. And the more they attack in Gaza, the more their assets get swept everywhere else.
yeah, I don't think they're going to make it.
Yeah. I think we're actually at the beginning stages of like a Mandela like moment for Israel.
Yep.
And it feels very much like I was talking to a family member who'd served in Zimbabwe and Rhodesia and all that, in South Africa earlier today. Actually, was it Saturday? Whatever it was, Saturday we were chatting, and he was saying to me that yeah, it feels very much like it did right before the Nelson Mandela came into power in South Africa. You know,
Do you think
that's
actions of what Israel is doing is what the play is with our with Biden is let Israel continue to destroy their reputation around the world and slowly smother them out. But the sad thing is there's a lot of collateral damage of lives lost. But um,
well, I think we're not really understanding the degree to which a lot of the I think we're not understanding the degree to which a lot of Israeli assets operate in our economy, in our commanding heights, be it, in DC or in venture capital or private equity. I mean, there are lots of Israeli spies, effectively, who operate in Silicon Valley. And if you go to my Twitter page, you'll see Netanyahu shaking hands with Peter Thiel, right? Like that's pretty clear. And if you look at Keith Raboy's relationships or Sam Altman's relationships or Elon Musk's relationships with Israel, right? Like and with Netanyahu in particular, it's all there. All right, I will let up the astute galoot speak, but if he misbehaves, I will kick him so hard that he will rue the day that he ever spoke in any of my spaces. So with that said, let's let the astute galoot up. I swear to God, you fucking Canadians. Okay, go ahead, astute galoot.
Hey, Chuck, real quick, I'm going to let Anglo-Acadian up because he messaged me what he wants to talk about, and it's important.
All right, is it important? Okay.
Yeah, and he's not Canadian, I don't think.
I think he's
Are you
Canadian.
sure?
I think he's Canadian.
Me and him have some mutuals that are mutuals with you, so.
All right. Well, let's let Astute speak first. Go ahead, Astute.
Hello,
Yes, go ahead.
Charles. That was a great intro. Thank you. Thank you. No, I appreciate it. And really, if somebody else needs to talk, I'm kind of been a while, and
Get to the point. Get to the point, Astute galoot.
I'm very much into what you're saying tonight because I saw a lot of this coming through listening to you a long time back. So you were just answering a lot of my questions about what I was going to ask you about what you think Biden will do. I agree too. I think he's doing art of war, man. I mean, how is this not art of war? I mean, I think all the Americans, the young, the generation that's getting galvanized about this, calling him Genocide Joe. I mean, it's like this is bad news, right? But yet turning heads
I
to
think it's
genocide.
actually so. Here's the positive case for Biden. That Biden is actually deliberately kind of being a fuddy-duddy about the Israel issue to whip up the youth to turn this into an election galvanizing issue going into 24 to just crush the Israelis at the ballot box.
No, I mean, I agree with a lot of what you're saying, and even over the last minute there,
That's
where I
the
was
pro
waiting.
Dana. That's the pro Dana argument. I don't know that he's that smart. He may actually be that smart. I just don't know. That's
Here's
the
the thing.
Wait, was it? Say this again. He's somehow whipping up the youth vote,
Yeah.
but they're
Here's the
calling
thing,
him
right?
Genocide Joe.
Well, if they're calling him Genocide Joe, or what are they going to do? They're going to vote for Trump? Like, what are they going to do?
I know.
Well, they kind of might though.
No, you're high as a kite if you think that he's going
No,
to vote.
hold on, Charles. Don't
Think about
insult
that,
me.
Richard. I'm not going to insult
Yes,
you.
I
But
can think about
By the way,
2016.
guys, before you get into this, Charles, I also want to ask what you think still about Chris Christie, because that was my other thing about.
I think Chris Christie made a tactical error at the Republican Jewish coalition that is basically unforgivable.
Yeah. So you think no go there, but what about, because we talked last time, you said he was the only viable person, like Trump was going to bow
Well,
out.
if Trump collapses, which I think is still very possible with all the indictments he's facing, and I think that the deep state doesn't let you. If he basically got out of all the indictments against him and then still managed to win and on and on and on, he would be kind of like approaching like John Bunyan. He'd be like an American legend of like the highest order, and I just don't think he's capable of that. Even at the height of his powers, I don't think he was capable of dodging that much.
Charles, let me spin this a little bit. So I was a little bit surprised by Trump's comments, just going full on W. Bush terror war days at the Jewish conference, or whatever it was called, American Jewry for Israel United event. This is what I would say, is that it's not only like there's one argument. There were kind of, Trump is a projection screen. And in 2016, if you were a anti-Semite, you voted for Trump because he was, pro-Russia and anti-Bush, and or let's say anti-Zionist or anti-Semite. If you were a Jewish pro-Zionist of the highest order, you also liked Trump because, he hated the Iran deal, he talked about Israel, etc. He has a way of like A/B testing, if you want to call it that way, or of kind of like allowing himself to be a screen or a Rorschach test.
Yes, but we know too much about him now.
I get it, but just don't underestimate it. I could see Biden being scapegoated by all of this because he's Genocide Joe. He's your grandpa's president. He let the Israelis annex and Gaza and genocide the Palestinians. He brought us back to the Bush era. He abandoned Ukraine, which I have heard noises indicating this. I've heard policy noises indicating the latter, granted, and that's important. But I have heard rhetorical noises. And so I could see this all going to
he's
hell
asking
in a
for more money
handbasket
for
and Trump
Ukraine.
getting reelected. I can see it.
I mean, this is your most frustrating, most contrarian take, which is just like it's the most frustrating thing about you is the fantasy.
What if we just
Let me
put
throw
them
this in as well.
The fantasy
what
or
if
nightmare that you
Israel
have that
stops
Trump is
giving
coming
money
back?
to Ukraine? Right?
Let him dream. Just let him
What
dream.
if Israel stops giving money to Ukraine? That's the real fear. Like, how do we play this as
Israel's
as it
never
pertains?
given money to
Ukraine.
Ukraine.
Israel gives them fried Richard.
I know, but like, you know what I mean? They support, right? They're in a lot
No,
of
they don't
right now.
They support Russia, and Russia
They
supports
absolutely
Thank you.
Israel.
That's what we really need to talk
Russia.
about. Now, what's going to happen after Putin dies? Who's going to Moglovich or whatever going to have take his place? And who's really going to be running this fucking party? You know what I mean?
China.
Like, that's what I want to know.
That's a bit much, Galut. Enough of you.
I like how he just changed his spins, like whenever someone would react to him. It would be like, well, what if Israel stopped paying money? They're not paying any money. I know. And why is that? And they're pro Ukraine. Yeah, I know. And it's fascinating.
He comes into my spaces.
They're already in
every
Russia.
time,
Yeah, I know. But what
every
if they
time
flip back to
Tom
Ukraine?
convinces me to take him up on stage, and I always regret it. And I've done this now like 5 or 6 times. Like the man should be a used car salesman. He should not be in my spaces.
I think that's partly why I like him.
Like he just wears Thomas down, and then
no, he's a good salesman. I like
he's
it.
a great salesman. You know, he really
I
is.
like a great bullshit.
You should
artist.
hire him to
but
go
I think
work
he's
with you,
sincere.
Tom.
I like it.
Yeah. I mean,
Can we go to Anglo-Acadian?
Yes, let's go,
Mr.
Mr. Anglo-Acadian.
Okay, let's try that again. So when I said that Erwin Kotler is Canadian, there should be a big asterisk beside
Yes,
that.
he's Israeli, as for all get out. Yep.
Yeah, he's Israeli. His daughter is literally an Israeli Likud MP, and she has been made recently the head of Israel's special envoy for combating anti-Semitism. So Kotler is actually the Canadian equivalent for that, right? He's responsible for
Dude,
setting up.
I remember meeting him through Dershowitz back in the day, for what it's
Well,
worth.
there you go. So you're familiar with him then, right? And that's why I
Yeah, he
want.
seemed quite a demure, very polite man. He seemed very Canadian actually. But yes, what of him? I mean, they're all Israelis, right? Like pushing all this various stuff, and they have agents within our countries. If that's what you're inferring, or I mean, what's the takeaway, sir?
Okay, well, because yesterday he was meeting with congressional leaders on both sides to talk about the Hamas hostages, but also about Putin hostages, and to talk with the Tom Lantos Committee on Anti-Semitism. And mind if I just go off on that in a minute?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I do think it's important to note that there's like a lot of these anti-Semitism groupings or clubs or whatever, committees, commissions, whatever. They're basically just means for spies to talk to each other. But yeah, go ahead on that point.
Yeah, well, of course, like you just said, right? He's responsible for setting up a new Holocaust museum in Montreal, and he's the head of the Raoul Wallenberg, blah blah blah, which is pushing to get a new Holocaust memorial holiday recognized, a Raoul Wallenberg Day recognized in various states and all over the U.S. and Canada, etc. So right now, him and his daughter, right, they're tag teaming, of course, right, on working on various committees across the world. So it's like it's this amazing dynasty, right? Where it's like you would know about it, but how many people would actually know about Erwin Kotler or his daughter, or the fact that they're cooperating between officially the Israeli government and he's acting as his own entity in Canada, and then going to the United States, not as well. He's going there as the head of a charity group, the Raoul Wallenberg Center, right, for Human Rights, and instead of being listed as a foreign lobbyist, he's being seen as just an NGO human rights campaigner advocating on. Yeah,
Do
I
you think
know.
that that's true? Do you think people really believe that shit?
I mean, I've seen a lot of retarded shit since this conflict kicked off on October 7th, and I don't know if they believe it or if they're just paid to, but is
No,
there a difference?
I think a lot of people have the Israelis number these days. There's a lot of people that have come to me like privately that were like, "Oh, I thought you were like a little crazy on the whole Jew thing, and like, frankly, like you're kind of an anti-Semite." And then I like started like paying attention and reading your stuff, and I was like, actually, like Charles is onto something. Like these people are a little, and I'm like, well, don't sell me that well, but I do think that people are waking up to it. Like I think the PR that people have. I mean, the brand is quite weak, right? Like the global Zionist brand is very weak right now. I think the
Chuck,
polite,
how familiar are you with the Henry Jackson Society?
very familiar. I know a number of their members, and yeah, I think these Zionist organizations they're not it anymore. I mean, we're in an environment now where the Jews are effectively self-deporting from a lot of our elite schools. Like they're threatening to withhold donations or whatever. They're threatening to withhold money. But like, if you're Harvard University and you have a $50 billion endowment, like you don't care. Like whatever, right? It doesn't matter if they give you like a few $1 million. Like that's not a big deal, right? So I think what's happening is that people are just not putting up with this stuff anymore. Um, and I think it's kind of over. I think it's played out.
There is another angle to this. So presently, President Herzog of Israel, when he was head of the Jewish agency, he got on a lot of shit because he said that intermarriage is worse than a plague for the Jewish American community because the more Jews dilute within themselves, marry outside, the less importance the Holocaust and Jewish identity becomes to them.
Yeah, I
And
mean, I mean, Dershowitz wrote this book called "The Vanishing American Jew," which I highly recommend people read. But it's basically makes the argument that there's all these people who are converting out or marrying out or whatever, and that basically the only thing that Jews have in common is anti-Semitism or the Holocaust generally, and that as time goes on, that becomes more and more ancient history, becomes less and less salient.
And this is perfectly how the Henry Jackson Society ties in, because of course Henry Scoop Jackson is the one who was responsible for strong arming the Soviet Union into allowing like Jews to emigrate from the Soviet Union to Israel. Now,
Oh, so
presently,
I don't believe that that was a strong arming. So I actually believe that a lot of the Refusnik Jew stuff was a kind of fake politics. So I actually think that the many of the people who went and settled Israel in the 1990s, basically the 1980s, 1990s, many of them were actually Russians, and that's actually the problem that we currently have, is that like your Shamirs, your Natan Sharansky's, all those people are actually like fake defectors and are actually loyal to the Soviet Union, and that includes people like who's that chess player, Gary Kasparov, and all of that. I think all of that is basically the real story.
Now, this is the thing.
By the
So
way,
the
I've written about this. If people are interested in this question, just go to my. I
You
talked
think
about.
Gary Kasparov, who's a obviously amazing chess player, anti-Putin, he's loyal to the Soviet Union?
Yes, he was a
Wow,
communist back in the day. I've written about this. If
interesting.
people are interested in this, so so my grandfather, who was CIA, my Colonel Lundquist, he was involved with a lot of these like fake defectors that the Soviets would do, and his view was that Kasparov was one such. Natan Sharansky was definitely one. I mean, that's not even in dispute anymore. And so I've written about this. If people are curious about it, you can just search the piece I wrote about the Facebook connection, where there's all these Russian Jews, and they're kind of like there's a lot of fake defectors going on.
What
Um,
about Lex
But they're
Fridman?
loyal to a country that no longer exists. I mean,
well,
what?
they're loyal to. Well, this is the question: does the Soviet Union still exist or not? It exists in forms and pockets, right?
I mean, in every Trotskyite height, the Soviet Union still exists, right?
Yes, I think that's fair. That's a fair point.
And now,
Um,
just as this is my take from what I've been seeing, and I've seen a lot of Jewish doomer posting, and I think it's forced because again, Herzog, as the head of the Jewish agency, the main function of the Jewish agency is to encourage Jews to move to Israel. Now, when I keep on
yeah.
seeing,
By the way, they do a lot of targeting. The Israelis do a lot of targeting of American and French and other Jews to scare
yes,
them into moving to Israel.
and I'm
And so
seeing a
what
lot
they do,
of big Jewish names saying that England's Jews are going to be gone in 20 years. It's like
yeah.
what
So
an
what they do
amazing
is
time
they
frame.
run. So they're basically what they try to do is they try to get everyone to take their money and assets and move to Israel, because the Israeli economy is doing so poorly. It needs a lot of the money of these other Jews, and it needs them to make aliyah. Think of it like a giant Ponzi scheme. They need these people to move there because they don't actually have a real thriving economy.
And I've read BB's book this year, and
Which one? Which book? Because he has
hi-
several.
his most recent one, the really thick one, the one where he basically puts his bragging about in the hardcover where it shows like the map of the Israeli agreements with the Arab countries
By
that
the way,
he
by the
helps
way,
them.
that book supposedly was written by Yoram Hazony. That's the
Oh,
rumor.
no kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was painful to read. But the one thing that kept on popping out to me was that he would be openly talking about how, again, thanks to Henry Jackson, right, by bringing in the Soviet Jews, be they religious or not, right, it was a demographic boon to them, and it's like you saw the same
Well,
thing.
it's even more interesting than that. So what happened was that when Israel was controlled by the Manhattan Jews, right? There was always this way in which like the Lauders or the who was the guy who owned the New York Daily News? Howard Zuckerman, right?
Yeah.
They could always like put the kibosh. If Netanyahu acted out, they could always like jerk his chain and shut him down, right? And so what happened was that when the Soviet Jewry all started coming to Israel and started voting for Natan Sharansky's party and voting for Bibi, that basically gave Netanyahu political cover, where he had all the stands and Russian Jews and the Russian world, and that basically made it so that he didn't have to listen to the United States anymore. He could pursue a sort of independent Israel policy, and that kind of coincides with his kind of return to power and with 9/11 and all this other stuff around that period.
So sending all of the Soviet Jews and smuggling them out of Soviet Union, sending them to uh, Silicon Valley, right?
Yeah, Silicon Valley was a big part. I mean, he had the whole binational security state. The idea being that they were going to install a lot of Soviet Jews in these major tech companies, and this was a concerted policy on the part of the Israeli state. Tom, if you had that piece that I did about Sheryl Sandberg's parents, Adele and Joel Sandberg, who were Israeli spies, that might be useful for people to see as well. And of course, Sheryl Sandberg, CEO at Google, she was of course forced out of Google over espionage and security issues there.
Do you recall Dennis Prager? Like he was like lamenting that Sergei, that back when he was helping with Henry Jackson and getting the Soviet Union Jews out, he was saying, "Oh, Sergey Brin, I can't believe I worked so hard to get you guys out, and you're not like the most diehard fanatic Zionist, and you're not." And it's like, again, you're exactly what you're saying, right? He helped them get in, and he helped them infiltrate into Silicon Valley.
Well, Jan Koum, of course, Jan Koum built WhatsApp, and WhatsApp has all these holes in it that the Israelis use. And Jan Koum, WhatsApp was acquired by Facebook, and Jan Koum is a big Nikki Haley donor, right? So that kind of speaks for itself.
Do you also recall when the Ukraine conflict kicked off right away? And now I'm sure you're familiar with the organization. What's it called? The International Friendship of Christians and Jews, and it's headed by the name escapes me right now.
Kubi?
But yeah,
Christians
is that?
United for Israel?
No, not Christians Unite for Israel. It's the other one that was started by that rabbi. You know the ads where it shows like starving Ukrainian Holocaust survivors.
I'm vaguely familiar with this, but yeah, go on.
Yeah, right. So I noticed right away because I was following them for quite some time that their main charitable mission was to bring Jewish Ukrainian orphans in, along with other Jewish Ukrainians, and to set them up in the West Bank. And again,
but there's a connection, and Arthur Bloom has talked about this as well, of basically moving all these people over, right, and to move them basically to take the Russian Jews and who are religious or not, and forcibly settle them in the West Bank, as a way of basically putting pressure on the Palestinians and basically taking over Jerusalem, as a whole, right? They want Jerusalem to be in their category. And people focus on the temple stuff, and I think all that's important up to a point, but really it's about basically putting pressure on that area demographically.
Yeah, and Portugal just reversed its own Portugal and Spain had offered citizenship return to Sephardic Jews had been expelled, and Abramovich, the Russian oligarch, had been applying to get in.
He's an Ashkenazi, and
Well,
and so
apparently
he
he's
was playing
Sephardic.
that game. No, he's an Ashkenazi, and he was trying to use the Sephardic policy to get access to the European Union, and the Brits and others put pressure on Portugal to basically rescind that policy.
Yeah, now that's tomorrow. I know the Henry Jackson Society is hosting a call, an online Zoom meeting with Alan Mendoza, and the subject is on militarily defeating Putin, which I just find that's very interesting that they're talking about defeating Putin militarily right now and Hamas.
Yeah, well, they are trying to link all these things, but yeah, it's very interesting kind of backdrop there. I do think we've kind of been going for a bit. I know Jonathan just came up. Jonathan, is there anything you'd like to
is
say?
there I just want to hear a little more of this. I mean, this is highly speculative, but I find it very interesting. I mean, if we to go back to this notion of there's a Soviet network that still exists, what do they want to see in Russia post Putin?
Well, they want to control it, right? So their view is that Russia's resources should be looted and that they should benefit from that looting.
Okay.
I think if you look at the Mackinder's World Island theory and Dugin's stuff about Eurasia, that was his way of propagandizing it for that project.
Mm-hmm.
And Jerusalem being the center of the world, and you see it on the the button clover leaf map, the world on it.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Yeah, I mean, I think this is important. You should go
Well,
on.
in Mackinder, Jerusalem's not the center of the world. I mean, in Mackinder, that's the heartland. Like Ukraine is a very key.
Right.
But how is Jerusalem the center of the world in this? Or what are you suggesting? I mean, I find it fascinating. But what I don't know.
That's the when you look at where does the Belton Road lead? What was the purpose of Belton Road? But Jerusalem being the center, as in the technology center that controls everything.
So it's kind of an extrapolation of Mackinderism.
Yeah, the way to think about it.
The geopolitical pivot of history. He who controls the heartland controls the world.
Yeah,
and,
so that's right. The basic way to think about it in a nutshell is that the collapse of Russia will lead to all of the resources of Russia flowing to Jerusalem, because that's where all of the real Russian Jews are. That's kind of the game that's going on there. Yeah. It's a very interesting period, I've got to say. You know?
Isn't it the Zionists, though?
These are not, so Putin is more complicated.
Well, he's
Putin
not
is
Jewish.
Russian, but he's
Right.
also Chinese, but he's also East German, but he's also
Right.
the intelligence services, but he's also the mafia state. He's at the top of like all these different pyramids that intersect in Russia. And the thinking is that when he collapses or he dies or whatever, that what will happen is that a lot of Russia's resources will flow through Israel, in much the same way that a lot of Africa's resources flew, basically kind of went through Israel into the global economy and the global world. That basically all roads lead to Jerusalem. When Jerusalem needs to be a political capital, but also a financial capital, it basically that's the idea in essence. And
Gotcha.
all of this databases, all this biometrics, all this collecting of everybody's data, all of that research will be done through Jerusalem.
And Richard, to that point, it goes along with the stuff that like Adam Green talks about, like the religious side of it fits in kind of like perfectly to that type of plan
Yeah,
or outlook.
there's a religious claim to it, but I think I think it's important. But I think that's like for the rabbis and everything to have a part of
Right.
that.
That's to get that constituency
Yes,
all
that's for that
wild up about it.
constituency. But I think it's actually an anti-Tel Aviv play more than it's anything else. Intra-Israel politics, because basically the people who've settled Jerusalem don't like the Tel Avivians, who they regard as basically like not sufficiently Jewish.
Yeah, like what did Sarah Netanyahu's assistant call one of them? I mean, the K word. Like how
Yeah.
they talk, like how they think of like that portion of the population is kind of wild.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So basically, the way to think about Russia in this context is that Stalin comes in, Stalin purges all the Jews. Putin comes in, Putin uses the Chabad network to discipline all the Jews. And, what's happened is that all these Jewish oligarchs have made a bunch of money selling the resources of Russia to Germany and to China and to various other places, and their basic role is to be kind of court Jews for Putin. That he can tax them, he can rely on them to do various operations from their various yachts. This is, of course, why the yachts have to be seized, because the yachts are actually instruments of the Russian mafia / Russian state. So that's kind of like what that's all about, right? And the theory is that while Putin's gone, we no longer have to respect that arrangement that he had with us through Rabbi Lazar and the whole Chabad network. And that, in fact, we don't have to care about this anymore, and that we can effectively call the shots moving forward. We can have a Yeltsin, or we can have some other patsy who's like in charge, but really we're in charge. Which, by the way, is something that if you read 200 Years Together, or the various translations of it by Solzhenitsyn, it's ultimately an end state that he believes that will happen to the Russian Empire. That he believes that basically the Russians will be subjugated under a kind of Jewish oligarchy.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, is a major reason the neocons never wanted that book translated, for what it's worth.
Somebody that wrote a critique of Mackinder's island theory, at the time when they wrote it, they said that like the biggest issue anybody would have accomplishing that is removing Crimea from control of Russia. Well,
That's right.
that already happened, but then they took it back in 2013.
Yeah, the question of Crimea. So Crimea was taken back in 2014.
Yeah, 14.
And Crimea. So Crimea is
The Black
basically
Sea.
it's the control of the Black Sea and the control of all of the grain and everything, all the resources coming out of Ukraine. All of those resources in this theory are all supposed to be flowing to through the criminal networks and everything to Jerusalem. So that's like what Kolomoisky is, right? Kolomoisky is basically the Jew who's in charge of the fiefdom of Ukraine. And then the way he controls that fiefdom is he has a fake nationalist leader in the form of Zelensky. And then all those resources flow to Ukraine. Now, what has happened is that Blinken and others have come in and they basically said to Zelensky, well, you want weapons, we'll trade you weapons for de-oligarchization or removal of all the oligarchs from Ukraine. That includes Kolomoisky. So that in turn has changed the political economy of Ukraine, obviously. And then the other thing that happened was, the head of the defense ministry in Ukraine is one of ours now, rather than one of these criminal Jews that's connected to Putin, not to Putin, but to Netanyahu. And that guy is basically, he's an ethnic Tatar who is very 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 pro Turkish world. So the Turks obviously have a different view of what's going to happen, and their view is that there's going to be a restoration of the Ottoman Empire. So those are kind of the competing visions of what the future of the Middle East looks like. For what it's worth, I happen to believe that the Turkish one is much more likely than Jerusalem, all the resources flowing through Jerusalem. Because for one, I just don't think it's very possible to run Jerusalem as an industrial, thriving place where all the resources go through. You know what I mean? It doesn't, like this idea of like turning Jerusalem into a kind of Dubai or something, I just think it's extremely unlikely.
Interesting.
Is there an Iranian solution, I guess?
What's
Or
that?
Is there an Iranian, big Iranian Middle Eastern solution?
Yeah, I mean, so the Iranian vision is basic. Well, it depends which version of the Iranians we're talking about. There's a bunch of Iranians that like the black market that Netanyahu has presented because they make a bunch of money trading the oil and selling it illegally all throughout the world. Right, so that's one version of events, and the mullahs like that world, and other people kind of like that world too. Like Erdogan's wife likes that world because they're all drug dealers that basically became religious, so they sort of like they're in the black market world, and that's kind of what her marriage to Erdogan is. It's a union between the dark, black magic world, or the black market world, and the religious world and the political world. So that's kind of what that alliance is about. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people that don't want a regularized world, right? They prefer the criminal world, the dark world, the paying bribes, all that. Like they don't want a world in which there's like taxation and regulation and all of that. That's very scary to them. The mobsters don't want above board transactions. Like that's like the worst thing that could happen to them.
Is there like a Persian and Iranian state future where Iran
most likely, I think what will happen is the crewing up of Iran and Turkey and Qatar. That world, I think, is much more likely than people want to give credit to.
I will say in February, I don't know if it was February, it was 2019, there was an article in Times of Israel that Israel and Iran were set to do a free trade agreement that was going to be managed by Russia. Mm-hmm. And I'll find that article and post it. Now, obviously, COVID happened, and I don't know if that free trade deal actually ever happened. I don't think that it did, but you could see how that would play into what we were just talking about. That was a piece of it.
Yeah, I think that's correct. I think, the question of free trade is always the question of who regulates the trade, right? Who's the arbiter of whether the trade is free or fair?
Well, it was going to be managed by Russia, so
this is the point, right?
Yeah,
so if it's going to be managed by the Russians, then what it really means is that the Russians are going to collect all the bribes and run the whole show, right? So
yeah.
And I also think that whole story was actually a feint on the part of either the Russians or the Israelis, and I think it's more complicated than even that suggests. So the way I would put it just is the Russians and the Israelis want to dominate the oil and the oil revenue that comes out of Iran. they want to basically control that state. And so they use Iran as basically a way of like collecting a lot of illegal cash for the perpetuation of the Israeli state. So
What's the chances that Biden lifts the sanctions on Iran?
I mean, he should. He's that's the plan, right? Like the obvious thing that will happen is there will be a corridor for the Turks through Iran into Azerbaijan, into the Caspian Sea, and into the Central Asian countries, which are all Turkic. And that kind of alliance will solve the Iran problem is they don't really have industry. The Turkish problem is they don't really have energy. So when they're crewed up together, that creates all kinds of opportunities for the Turkic Iranian world.
Well,
Like
I would
they
have thought that the president of Egypt would have been more supportive of Biden through this situation.
No, because he's an Israeli proxy.
Okay. But you would think that they'd like the.
No, Sisi is the dictator in Egypt that is pro-Israel.
Yes, but surely he doesn't want his, what's it called, where the waterway.
You mean the Nile or what? What do you
Yeah,
mean?
what's it called though? It's not the Nile.
The dam there?
The
No.
Suez Canal?
Yeah, the Suez. Like you would think that he would want still to have that, because didn't Netanyahu wanting to build one through Israel now?
No, that's all kind of like way overstated. Basically, the way to think about it is that so Morsi was the one that was democratically elected that was pro-Muslim Brotherhood. And the Muslim Brotherhood just generally does not tolerate a lot of Israeli behavior. It just like doesn't support it, thinks it's bad, whatever. He was, of course, toppled by Sisi, and Sisi is very pro-Israel. And Sisi is also the one who was like controlling Robert Menendez on behalf of the Israelis. After that all got too hot, after you remember that Robert Menendez got indicted the last time around, so the Israelis couldn't run him as an asset as much anymore.
So what does he plan on? What did he want to do with the Palestinians? Just to kill them, or to turn them into
Who?
slaves, or he
Who?
wants that land? Bibi.
Who does? No, the land thing is incidental. Land
Okay.
is useful to the religious part of the coalition, but obviously he doesn't want any more protests against him in Israel. He doesn't want to be brought down. The longer he can postpone his trial, the longer he can have a state of emergency, the more he's stays out of prison. I mean, if the trials actually go through, he will go to jail for the rest of his life.
Well, they're not going to go through as long as there's a war going on.
That's right. So what's the incentive structure?
Someone needs to take him out.
Well, yeah, I happen to think that that's the only solution is assassination.
It is the only solution. I'm surprised that someone hasn't cut a deal that's
By the
sitting
way,
right
it's
beside
talked
him.
about all the time in Israel. They talk about it on Israeli TV. Okay,
There's going to be another Hitler. They can't shoot him. They can't.
they're talking about publicly in Israeli television on like the
Oh,
equivalent,
good.
like they're talking about killing him.
Hmm.
But let's go. We're gonna go to Anglo-Acadian, and then we'll close out the space because Tom and I have to both get to bed. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Anglo.
Okay. Have you been noticing in the past couple days they had in NYC, in like Times Square, in DC, and in London? They've been setting up these giant 200 seat tables, right, to raise awareness about like the hostages, right? It's this giant gimmick. It's really obnoxious. Have you seen that?
Yes, I have seen this. I mean, I think it's the by obsessing about the hostages, they make it much more about Hamas and less about Netanyahu, which I think is probably where they want to go.
Yes. Now, yesterday, the two things popped up, right? One was that the Board of Deputies of British Jews and the Jewish Leadership Council put out a joint statement that was echoed by Chief Rabbi Ephraim Mervis, right, saying that a ceasefire and politicians calling for a ceasefire is completely unacceptable for the state of Israel. Now, what I find really interesting with that is that Alan Mendoza's wife, Claudia, is the co-leader right now at the Jewish Leadership Council. So effectively, it's not just the Henry Jackson Society, but the Jewish Leadership Council, who is working in tandem with the Henry Jackson Society to push against the ceasefire, push for more conflict. And what I found, again, I didn't notice so recently, but Alan Mendoza's family, on his father's side, his mom's a Finnish convert. His family on his father's side, the Mendozas, have been in London since the 17th century. They're literally Marrano Jews. Now, Chuck, I'm sure you're very much red-pilled on the Marrano and the Don May question, yes?
Yes, I think you should explain. I mean, I can explain what a Don May is, but you should explain what Murano is.
Okay, Marrano is, well, the difference between a Marrano and a converso is a converso is someone who is implied to have a sincere conversion to Christianity, right? Jews that were converted to
Yeah, this is
Christianity.
the so-called. These are the so-called crypto Jews,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
Which I think
Marrano,
is.
uh,
Well, yeah, go ahead.
yeah, Marrano translates as swine, but I've actually seen Sephardic sources that actually say that, the term Marrano might actually be a Ladino term that means like, may they be damned on Judgment Day but it's a Jewish like insult used by other Jews. But I just find it's very interesting when you brought up 200 years, and it's like, again, you have the Don May connection, you got the Marrano connection, and like, yeah, it's just kind of funny, right? It's the echoes of 1492 like haunting us to this day.
Yeah, I
Very
mean
spooky.
The Don May thing, just for those who are unaware, and is they're basically like fake conversions to from Judaism into like Islam or into Christianity, right? So what the
Yes.
thing is that they penetrate these religious orders, and there's a lot of evidence suggesting that Ataturk was a Don May.
No, he was not, and that's a huge libel, and I do want to push back against that. And now the Don Mays were, strictly speaking, they were followers of a Marrano, like, well, as a Sephardic Jewish rabbi who claimed to be the Messiah, who the
Well, let me
Sultan
put it
said.
this way: they do not allow any DNA testing in Turkey whatsoever of anything touching Ataturk.
That said, like you did have a lot of the actual Don Mays who were with the Young Turks who plotted against Ataturk.
I mean, if you look at the history, right? So, I mean, we could do a space on Turkish history at some point. But if you, because I know Tom's a little pressed for time, as am I. But the Don May, look, he lived in Salonika. He went to a school that was like the Jewish school. He, when they took over Izmir, they didn't touch any of the Jewish neighborhoods. He had all these Jews who worked for him, who liked him, who were engaged with him. He looks like a Sephardic Jew. Okay, like I know you're not like supposed to notice that, but it's like pretty obvious when you look at him. There's a lot of interesting details there, but in any event, my takeaway for what it's worth is I think it's very interesting. Ataturk never had any children. Find that very interesting, and the fact that he effectively drank himself to death, I find very interesting. Um, but in any event, why don't we call it a night? I hope everybody has a very pleasant Monday and pleasant rest of their week. I am suing Hal Lambert later today, which will be fun. I'll be in 3 lawsuits going on at once.
Going
So
down the highway to Hal.
yeah, wish me luck. Thank you for everybody who's given me advice on it. And yeah, I think in general, we'll maybe do a few more of these spaces this week. For those who are curious, I've written about a lot of these subjects at my Substack. It's free, available to the public. I also run a company called Traitwell, which is a genetics company. If you've done 23andMe and you're interested in these questions, it's free. It's available to you, and you can just look at all that stuff. It's all on my page to see if people are interested in that kind of thing. They can just check out my main account and all that. Hope everybody has a good week, and feel free to DM me if you're a bit shy or what have you. Always happy to chat in the DMs. So have a good week and chat soon. Take care.
Thank you, Chuck.
No sweat. Bye.